Please raise your virtual hand if you wish to speak, and then only unmute when a chair invites you to make a contribution. As the chair, I may ask that you are muted if you do not participate in this way. First of all, apologies for absence. I have absences from Councillor Vicky Moore, Councillor Sean Lyons and Councillor Jamie Daniels. Are there any further apologies? No, thank you. Are there any disclosable pecuniary interests, please? Noted. Thank you. Can we have a look at the minutes held on the 2nd of July, 2025? We're happy to receive and accept the minutes. Do you propose them? Anyone like to propose the minutes, please? Thank you, Councillor Mark Morris. And a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour, please? Anyone against? The abstentions? Thank you. The public question time, we have received no questions from members of the public. And members' question time, we've received no questions from any members. So we'll carry on. And rather than introducing ourselves at the start of the meeting, there's quite a few of us, when it comes to your part to speak, if you'd like to introduce yourself then, that'd be appreciated. Thank you. When you do speak, as I forgot, please press the right button on your microphone. I did demonstrate a while ago how not to do it. So if you just use that good practice now to press your right button, that'd be appreciated. Thank you. Now we've quite a large and detailed report to go through. So that we're going to break it down into 4 different stages. We will look at adult social care, then education, then SEND, and then children social care. So after an officer has actually presented one of those areas, we'll then have member questions. And if I could just highlight on the start of the paper, performance paper, the recommendation 3.1. But the committee considers the report and identifies areas specific of focus that it wishes to explore in the work programme. So as we're going through the quarterly report this morning, if there are areas which we need to then consider for the next work programme, we can bear those in mind as we progress through the meeting. And there will be an opportunity after the questions in each section to highlight any areas you feel are pertinent to explore further. Thank you. We'll now move on then to the quarterly performance monitoring report. Hand across. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. My name is Tanya Miles. I'm the Director for Adult Social Care and the current Interim Chief Exec. But for this committee meeting, I'm here as your Statutory Director for Adult Social Care. So we have 3 papers today for committee. The first paper that we're going to be looking at this morning is the Performance Monitoring Report that covers care and wellbeing, in brackets adult social care, education, SEND and children's social care. I recognise it's a very long report. We're going to take the report as read. We have the key officers around our table today, and what I'm going to ask each officer is just to do a quick summary of their area of report. Then we'll have a conversation, a discussion around that section. And as the chair said, what I'm looking for today is for our next committee meeting, which is in January, for us to think about what is it by exception you would like to receive in a future performance report, given that the report that you're receiving today is very long because they're very big services. But I think it's important for this scrutiny committee to consider what areas of focus you would like to scrutinise in particular regarding their performance. So we're going to move and take the first item first, which is Mandy Alcott and Natalie McFall in terms of the care and wellbeing. Thank you.
Hi everybody, it's Natalie McFall. I'm the Service Director for Care and Wellbeing. As Tanya has said, this is quite a big report, but we hope that this gives a real overview of the services aligned to adult social care today, key areas of opportunity and challenges that Mandy will step through in terms of the salient points of the report. What will follow after that is our CQC report, and going forward you will see that embedded within our continuous improvement and our future performance report. So the two, there is a natural alignment with those. So I'm going to hand over to Mandy at this point, and then we're happy to take any questions after the report.
Hello, Amanda Alcock. I'm one of the service managers in the adults area, and I work under Natalie. So just to give some highlights, mainly we've framed at the start of the report the demographic pressure. We have that in in the over 85s, and at the same time as this, we have a drop in birth rates and migration of younger adults working age out of the area. So that gives you a view as to why we're focusing on the areas that we're focusing on in adult social care. We are working with internal and external partners to understand the demand and develop new ways of working. So the first area that I'm going to talk about in the report is the community social work teams. The focus there is getting to know people sooner, putting them in touch with services as early as possible. This helps them preventing needs increasing and having increased needs over time. We're working into the family-based hubs and also working on a model that is Let's Talk Local. We have an average of 88 referrals a week, with 29% of those referrals being made by the individual or a family member. So we can see from that model that it is a successful model, and it's proven to be an effective way to manage and lower demand. From that work, about 35% go to requiring a full Care Act assessment. And at the same time as this, we've also reduced waiting lists. We've seen a increased demand of self-funders and also capital reduction referrals in the last 2.5 years. And due to this specific demand, we are working in a different way to look at how we support self-funding market to understand decisions that people make when they're choosing their care. We've also seen complexity increase in the community teams, specifically around dementia. The next area in the report is hospitals, ICS, and in general, the summary there is that we've sustained performance in discharging a higher number of people home, which is really good for the individual. We have managed that by using service like START, and this has helped us to support really more complex needs at home. The next area of the report is dolls. In dolls, deprivation of liberty, we've seen a national increase in the total number of applications by 11%, and at the same period we've had a sustained upward trend of 9%. We use in Shropshire the ADAS RAG tool, and also the team works with the other teams in the community to support the dolls' work. The next area is the safeguarding team. The safeguarding team offers a same-day response to service, same-day response service to residents, and the team then determine the level of risk and the next appropriate steps and establishes communication with the person. A lot of work has been done with the first point of contact to make sure that we have that very quick, robust response. Making safeguarding personal data demonstrates that the service consistently places the individual at the centre of the safeguarding process, and it's worth noting that 89.66% of people surveyed were said that outcomes were successfully achieved. In the occupational therapy area, we have reduced the backlog and now working on referrals from 2024, which is a significant improvement. And we also use OT capacity flexibly over the county. In September, we successfully appointed an occupational therapist who is starting in November, and they will be provide a pivotal role in advancing our practitioner practice model. The next area of the report is the emergency social work team. We undertook an audit of all activity in an 8-week period in preparation for inspection and found that there was a sound and robust practice alongside professional curiosity. We also received excellent feedback from the inspectors during the inspection, who stated that experienced practitioners responded effectively to the range of children's needs. The next area we've got is preparation for adulthood. The preparation for adult team engages with young people earlier to support future planning and demand management. The allocations for preparation for adult team have increased by 51% from April 2023 to currently. And that's in part due to the work that we've done since the last scrutiny report in lowering the age of our involvement. So we now get involved with all known 16-year-olds and lower age when there is complex planning that's required. We have learning disability next on the report. The newly established learning disability team has improved the pathways from children to adult services, and there's been improved timeliness of assessment and reviews by the learning disability team. We've had significant impact on the longest wait for reviews, and this continues to be an improving area of performance. There has been work undertaken with the commissioners to improve the support received. We've had focus reviews with commissioning colleagues, and the outcome of that being individuals having the right service to meet their assessed needs at the right cost with the appropriate funding stream. And we're also looking with commissioning colleagues with new models of support and improving using support models like supported living and shared lives. We then have the mental health area. The mental health social work teams have maintained a zero wait time for the last 12 months. And we've also introduced, around last Christmas, the Let's Talk mental health model. This has now been embedded in practice and offers timely information, advice and assessment of the needs. The referral data that we have says that we achieve successful outcome with a third of referrals at first conversation, a third of referrals go on to an assessment within 28 days, and a third being allocated for ongoing social work support. The team has also undertaken reviews on individuals known to the team, which is on average 850 people known at any one time. We've completed 72.2% of character reviews and 72% of the section 117 reviews.
Okay, thanks, Mandy. So just to sort of summarise, really, we've given some context within the report because we think it's really important that we're not just looking at our demand currently, but that we're thinking about our future demand. And what we're forecasting is very much what we're seeing at the moment. So in terms of our increased numbers of people presenting to the service, they do tend to be over 65 and over 85. But actually some of our more complex people are within our learning disability and preparing for adulthood services. They tend to be those higher cost areas. So that's why we're working closely with commissioning at the moment to really look at those delivery models. Our performance is good in that area. We support a lot of people at home, meeting their goals and aspirations, but actually we do know that this is a very complex area nationally in relation to the 18 to 64 age group. And over the coming year, we'll be doing a lot of work with children's services to look particularly at the preparing for adulthood opportunities. As you can see from the report, we're getting in there earlier, which is great. We're leaning in, we're getting involved at an earlier stage around 16. But actually, what are those all-age delivery models? So those are the areas that we want to work in. You can see the areas of challenge. So we've seen reductions in our waiting list within the community. However, we're still looking at 88 on average referrals per week. So even though we're managing that demand, it's still high demand. With our Let's Talk Local offer, you know, we're really looking at that prevention offer. In the future, we really want to explore the neighbourhood health offer, which we think will provide really good opportunities in terms of partnership. But that demand is still there, and it's something that we're still managing. It's a big service area, and we are seeing people presenting with those complex needs. So we hope that the report indicates our areas of challenge the areas that we're trying to tackle. You can see how we're managing demand, but those areas that are still showing a little bit of volatility. And as we come on to talk about our CQC and continuous improvement, you should see an alignment with some of the areas that we're focusing on in terms of our transformation going forward, in terms of that, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for this report. Are there any questions, anyone, please? I have just a couple.
Yes.
The initiatives preparing for adulthood and mental health, they seem very secure, and so obviously having a good impact on the community we have here. How are you measuring the success of those initiatives?
Sorry, preparation for adulthood and mental health?
Yes, the initiatives you're putting forward, how are you measuring the impact that's having?
So there is specifically a mental health pathway for young people preparing for adulthood.
Yeah.
We have one social worker who works specifically with young people using tier 4 beds. So they're the hospital beds that you have under the age of 18. So she will go to weekly meetings, work with the family and the individual to make sure that we absolutely understand their needs prior to 18, and that worker undertakes the first character assessment, and we're looking for safe supported discharge from tier 4 provision, and commissioning support in a timely way for when that young person becomes 18.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. Mandy Duncan, Councillor of the Sunderland and Old Heath. I'm really interested. I've just got a few questions really about around the self-funding aspects of this. It seems as though that's one of the kind of fastest growing pressure areas on the system. So how many people are we expecting to move from self-funding into council care over the next year? And what's the projected cost likely to be? That's sort of part of my question. But also I'm wondering what action is being taken to bring private care homes in line with council rates so that we're not sort of subsidising really inflated rates. So that's another part. And also just one thing you did mention about sort of working with residents to inform them and help them to plan a little bit more. Perhaps before their savings have all gone. So what are you doing to sort of help them make those informed choices? So sorry, there's quite a lot there, isn't it?
It's a really good question, because this is an area of focus for us, because I think particularly over the last year, we've really noticed an increase. We've always known that we've got a high self-funder market here in Shropshire, but I think in terms of people falling below the threshold, families trying to support people into care homes that are really expensive and not understanding the impacts of that when you're below the threshold. Obviously, we need to do some work with that. What we're trying to do at the moment is to look at our data in terms of who we've got in the service. But where we need to do more work is for those people that are not known to the council yet, and that's really hard to quantify. So in some of the work that we're talking about, you know, specifically within the family hubs, we want to look at that advice and information piece going out to all of those people that we don't yet know about, because that's the tricky bit for us really in terms of that forecasting, and that's what we want to be able to do going forward so that we can come into these sessions and say, these are some of our predictions, actually this is what we could look at. And at the moment we're really looking at, you know, what we've seen over the last year, which isn't the best indicator really in terms of that. So there'll be a real focus on how we look within our customer portfolio, about how we work with people that might not be known to adult social care, that we're giving families the right advice, because everybody wants to do the best by their family members and wants to support them at those times. But, you know, like with everything, it's the information that you have available to make those informed decisions. So we will be coming back to scrutiny and really talking about areas of which we're focusing. The commissioning services are also looking about how they work with care homes as well, because that doesn't help in terms of the costs and those fluctuating costs within the market. So we really need to do some proactive work in that space. to make sure that it's fair and that we've got that parity across. But it's a really good question that you asked, because that I think particularly from last year, where we started to see those spikes, it was really starting, we were seeing that complexity coming through, and actually how services like ours forecast and prepare for that. Really, so for me, it's really about the people that are not known to us more than the people that are known to us, because at least, you know, if we're already known to us and we've assessed you or we've given some families advice and support, we can do some work in and around those figures. But our challenge now is understanding that wider population piece.
I was interested to hear that there's an indication that people are potentially moving into a high care need environment before they actually need to be there. Do you have any specific data on what's driving them to do this, why, and therefore running out of money too soon to be able to support themselves when they're in a high need situation?
I think sometimes what we find when we look back, so when people come to us and we've assessed people's needs, family members or people in the community might be deteriorating, might be starting to struggle at home, and it's people's understanding of what they might need and what's available out there to support those needs. So whereas some people might be making decisions around care homes, actually, if you were to be assessed by the local authority, we might be saying, well, we've got reablement services, or we've got domiciliary care that can come in and support you. So we would advise some different pathways, and I think it's just understanding, you know, they're quite panicky situations, aren't they? If, you know, family members start deteriorating, struggling at home, and often we can give that advice and information about how we think we can best support your needs. So the worry is really when people haven't got that information, they haven't been assessed by us, and they make those decisions potentially in haste, in a situation of crisis. Whereas actually their needs might not be significant enough to actually need care homes. So again, that's why we're really going to be focusing on that advice and information, and actually getting it out there, the different ways that we can support people. You know, we've had great successes in recent times around supporting people with technology, and even people with complex needs are starting to manage their own needs very differently. But, you know, it's about having that information and support to understand the right pathways, really. It's that right support at the right time.
How are you going to get this information out there? And you're talking about technology, and I'm afraid this is a bugbear that I'm going to keep coming back to. My mother at 82 was fine with technology.
Yeah.
She's now 85.
Yeah.
Her care needs are increasing. She's not.
Yeah.
So how are we getting this information to people in a way that can really help them at the right time?
Absolutely. I mean, technology is one area, but it doesn't work for everybody, and it doesn't work at all times. So if you're known to the service, we would, you know, we do annual reviews, for example, where we look at people's changing needs to assess really and to understand whether the care that we've put in place is the right care. I think what we're going to try and look at in terms of the neighbourhood hubs is how we get information and advice to people we don't know. If I'm honest, that's the real challenge here, because we can talk about the statistics of people that are presenting to us. We can try and align that with the demographic forecasting, but actually understanding, you know, how many people have we got out there at the moment that are not known to adult social care making these sorts of decisions. We do not have that information. So we really need to look at that as part of the prevention offer, in terms of how, you know, just like we look at giving communities information about what's available in their local area, we need to be approaching it in the same way. With, you know, if you're making decisions about your care needs, you know, these are the areas that you need to consider. Do you want to come and talk to somebody in adult social care, actually? Because we'd much rather have a conversation with people and point them in the right direction. I know we talk about demand management a lot, but actually it's much more beneficial sometimes to have the conversation and to be able to support people to understand how best to meet their needs. But I, you know, I have to acknowledge it's an area that around the country we're all struggling with those people that we don't know. So it really is about how we utilise what we've got in our community hubs to really get those messages out there, and also thinking digitally online as well. I think we need to approach it in various ways and really tackle it in a number of areas.
Just to build on that response, so it's a complex maze out there in terms of how families get information, but often these individuals are in contact with their GP or their district nurse, or are receiving support from various health providers. We'd like to work on how we provide the right information and support to those GPs, those pharmacists, so that when they've got Mrs. Jones presented in front of them, rather than saying, I think it's time, dear, you go into a nursing home, actually, there is a range of information that GP has, of which one of those contact points is through the support that Natalie's just referred there to. Because what we're finding increasingly is that people are going into nursing homes that don't need to be there. And then we go in and do an assessment, and we're having that difficult conversation then to say, actually, I think we can support your mum in a different way. And then that's really difficult for the family then, isn't it? Because they've already had mum in that care home for maybe 6 months, 12 months. So it's how do we get upstream in a different way, and we believe it is going to be through those people that are in regular contact already, which is your GP, your pharmacists, and your consultants. But just kind of reflecting on my way into work this morning about what outcome was I looking for in this scrutiny, and I think a future scrutiny item should be around how do we support our self-funding market, because that's right for the residents of Shropshire, but also as councillors, you can see the budget pressures that adult social care are under right now, and it's one of our cost drivers. And I think the second area is around the complex area that Natalie and Mandy have worked through. So individuals with a learning disability and mental health is another cost driver for this council's budget. Part of that is down to individuals that have been in receipt of continuing healthcare from the ICB, where they're no longer in receipt of that. Again, that is a massive now cost driver for the local authority. We're really clear as a council that it's for us to commission and fund a healthcare service. And we're providing a lot of support to our social workers at the moment to make sure that they're really clear about what our lines are in terms of what's lawful. However, I think it would be an item for this scrutiny and possibly HOSC in terms of how we assure ourselves that we are meeting our absolutely core statutory duties.
Sorry. I think I have mentioned this once before. I'm councillor in Severn Valley, and I don't think we've got one of these hubs. And it's it's a very large area, and we've more or less only got one GP practice which serves most of that community. And we've got 3 big planning applications in, which is going to increase the size of that community quite a lot. And even from my own experience with my own GP surgery, getting to see one, as you know, is quite hard, really. And I think a lot of the people that we're talking about, there's a lot of pride comes into it, and they won't ask for help. They don't want to be seen as doing that, and they will hide their needs. And I wonder about different ways of communicating with them, as you mentioned, Dawn. You do a lot of social media, which I think is brilliant, and I share a lot of what you put out. And that I do that on the basis that the sister of the daughter of is going to see that rather than the actual person. And I think that's very important, but also anticipating some things. So, for example, you may know that come April next year, I think it is, that the everybody who gets the state pension will be taxed, because the tax thresholds haven't increased as the pension has increased. So I think it's from April 26, not 27. So you're going to get, people in their 80s and 90s getting tax demands, having to fill in a tax return, and if they don't fill it in on time, getting a fine. And there seem to be an awful lot of people who aren't aware of this. I think it's quite worrying for that group of people. Are we anticipating that you're going to have an awful lot of people suddenly getting very upset getting this letter through the post? And I wonder also, do you do you direct mail people? Even there's certain information you can gather about date of birth and that kind of thing. Can you target a particular group and send them a letter that's not a frightening letter, just about the services that are available? And if they don't need it, that's great. They can put the letter in the bin. But if they do, then they can do something from there, because you probably do need to target quite specifically sometimes on these things.
There's a couple of elements here. So the hubs that we've got at the moment are the family hubs. So it started with a children's focus in terms of doing that piece of work, and the next phase of that is the adults world. So adults have been leaning into the family hubs because we know family dynamics, all age approach is really good at meeting outcomes. But the particular focus on the adults cohort is going to be taking place now. We're trying to look at that alongside the adult social care front door, because what we don't want is a lot of people can be supported, and it doesn't need to be through adult social care. We want people to have the support and the advice and information as early as they can. They might not need to hear that from a social worker. They might need to just, you know, speak to somebody in their local community and understand that. But we want to get that balance right, and we want to make sure that there's a nice streamlined approach between what we develop in the community, which is more of our prevention offer, and what we have in terms of that more statutory and complex intervention, which is more your adult social care services. So we will be looking at how to develop the adult part of the family hub. So I recognise there's some in certain areas. How we develop that, whether it's a bespoke model, whether it's more outreach, we'll start to really think about that and develop it. You've then got all of the work that's happening in neighbourhood health. So ICBs are working with councils and the voluntary sector nationally to look at place. What does place mean for communities? The good thing about ambitions around place is that it's not a one size fits all, that it really does think about local communities and what's needed in that area. So there's a lot of scope here to do things differently now, and not in silos where you've got the health service building something in the community, and then you've got council services, and then you've got the voluntary sector. There's a real opportunity in terms of some of those national directions now to think about place very differently. So what we've got now will probably look very different as we go forward. But I think it's a really exciting time, especially around neighbourhood health, because it starts to look at, to your point, that population health data. That really does enable services to be more upstream and think about what's coming down the line, and to look at that all age family approach of what do we know about people in our local communities, and make sure that what we put in isn't that we've decided that every area is going to have a hub. What does every area need? What are local communities telling us that they need? So I think over the next couple of years, it's going to be quite an exciting time, particularly for a rural county as well, where you've got very different needs across the county. It's not a one size fits all. So that neighbourhood health offer, and how we start to bring services together so that people don't fall through the gaps. We want to be on the front foot of that, and we want to be talking about this demand in a very different way, so that people are supported earlier and not coming and knocking on our doors because they don't need us anymore. They've had that earlier intervention, even if that just delays the need for social care. That's still better for people's outcomes. So yeah, there's a lot going on in that. So I'd just say that what we've got at the moment, we're demonstrating outcomes, but it will change and it will start to look very different.
Thank you very much. I've got Ruth, then David, and we'll move on then to the next section. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Chair. Ruth Houghton, portfolio holder for social care for adults and children. We're just focusing on the adults on this. I'd really like to say thank you to Amanda and Natalie for a really clear report. And I'm very pleased to see the section on self-funders and deferred payment applications included, because it is an area of rising demand and cost. And one of the things we are trying to understand is the average length of stay in a care home, so that's a key piece of information to be shared with prospective self-funders in care homes, not to frighten them, because we should be celebrating ageing well, most definitely. But if people know that the average length of stay is 2, 3, 5 years or possibly less, they can make some sensible decisions about the money they have and the funding they have. So that's the piece of work we are working on. It's proving difficult to get the information together, but Natalie has very clearly stated it's very difficult to liaise with people that we don't really know until they're in crisis, i.e. they run out of money. So there's a lot of work going on. I really want to reassure the committee that that is an area of priority for service, looking at deferred payments and self-funders. And as you look at the graphs, you can see where the pressure is. And I mean, when you look at the deferred payment applications of 4.11, nearly £3 million last year on deferred payments, which the council has statutory duty to fund. And although the funding comes back in on the sale of a property, there is that revenue pressure as we go through. So there's some really good work in here, and I thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Finally, David, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to build on the point that Natalie made. I'm David Shaw. I'm the Director of Children's Services here at Shropshire Council. And just building on that, I think it's just to make committee aware that there is a tension here between the development of the family hubs and the reforms that are coming through for children's with the Care Act as it currently stands in adults. Moving forward, because what is being suggested and proposed and actually developing is a much earlier offer, and that challenges, as Councillor Houghton rightly says, that pure Care Act eligibility, and there's an additional pressure that I think we need to be aware of around this space, because what we will want to see, I'm sure all will want to see within the family hubs, is that earliest opportunity to work with the family, the young people, but also the adults that come with young people. And it's how that then tension is aligned, both in terms of financial and staffing resource implications as well, not just considering the geography of Shropshire as it stands. So within our current 8 family hubs, it is that work. So I wonder whether, Chair, it's an opportunity to just mark that as a possible item for future consideration in our work plan, because I think the children's social care reforms are more wide-ranging than just children's social care, but I think committee needs to be very excited on that.
We will have Councillor Mosley just to finish with. Thank you.
I was just going to congratulate the officers on the report. I mean, it's mainly positive, and certainly I've learnt a lot about the depth and details of the services that you are providing. I have to say I would have preferred fewer abbreviations and acronyms within it, and it's difficult to translate those as you go through the report. I think we need a glossary, which will probably be longer than the report itself if it was detailed. So I hope you're aware of that. But I just wanted to ask about one of the problems that Tanya, I think, identified, and that is the situation regarding funding and cuts. I noticed that in the external auditors report, who have warned the council about the circumstances that we are in, they did actually highlight adult social care as the area where we might be able to find some money. So it's just a question of the officers. How challenging is this for you on a day-to-day and monthly basis to find what's being asked for? And some comments on that and the likely impact on the service would be beneficial. I think it may well be that perhaps we need to scrutinise what the impact on the services are of those cuts that are coming ahead in more detail as we go through the year.
I'll pick up that question. So over the last couple of years, adult social care have taken £34 million out of their budget in terms of delivering services in a different way. So how have we done that? So we have reduced the number of people in short-term residential beds coming out of hospital. We've got more people going home first in their own homes, and that's a much better outcome for our Shropshire residents, but has also reduced that kind of cost pressure on the most expensive element in terms of short-term residential beds. And then we've been working on things like 2 carers in the car. So an individual who might need care and support overnight. Traditionally, they might need to go into a care home because they need 24-hour nighttime support. We now have a scheme across Shropshire whereby we can support somebody in their own home, but there are carers that roll around in a car that can support an individual through the night for toileting or if somebody falls. So there's a range of things that we've done in terms of transforming how we deliver the adult social care support. You will have read through the corporate peer challenge report that we had as a council in July that adult social care was in scope. They delve into adult social care in quite a big way in terms of looking at further opportunities. You saw in that report that they are very complimentary about the adult social care support in terms of governance, in terms of delivering enough savings, in terms of our transformation, and made no recommendations. They looked at benchmarking, so they looked at adult social care in Shropshire compared to other statistical neighbours. And what they said is that we benchmark either middle of the road or just under when you compare Shropshire against other stat neighbours. But what I would say to this committee is that no stone is not being overturned right now. We are looking across the country in terms of how other local authorities similar to Shropshire are delivering adult social care. We are working with somebody this afternoon who's coming in as an independent to look at how we've transformed over the last 3 years in Shropshire, to review what we think we can do differently over the next 3 to 4 years to try and get us into more of a sustainable budget and to put that real scrutiny and challenge into this service. And what I would say about both adults and children's is that we're really open to outside people coming in and scrutinising us and considering how we can do things differently, given the real pressures that this council is facing in terms of its budget.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you for your very detailed reports. Thank you for everyone for the contribution. I think there's definitely value there in actually pursuing some of these areas further as we've identified. So perhaps we'll consider this for the work programme. We're all in agreement with that. Thank you. If we could now move on to education.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, as I've said before, I'm David Shaw. I'm the Director of Children's Services. So I'm going to hand over to several colleagues to step you through the report as it stands for Children's Services. So that's education, that's early help and children's social care, and also SEND. And when we say SEND, we talk about the earliest identification of special education needs or additional support that's required, all the way through to those young people that we may require and do require, and we've issued an education, help and care plan for. So I'm going to hand over to John Rowe, and John is our local authority nominated officer. John, I'll hand to you.
Thank you, David. Good morning, committee. My name is John Rowe. I'm Head of Education Quality and Safeguarding. The team's undergone a change in title. I think the change in title is quite important. We were previously known as the Education Improvement Service. You may have seen in previous reports. We're now the Education Quality and Safeguarding Team. And I think the change in title reflects the change in emphasis. Since 2022, we're no longer in receipt of the School Monitoring and Brokering Grant, which supported a good deal of school improvement activities. There is a real need that I've reflected in the first part of this report to be able to ensure that we're increasingly in the space of making checks and challenges to support, to challenge, and where necessary to intervene to support high standards of education in Shropshire schools. And when I say Shropshire schools, I'm talking about all schools, including maintained schools and academies. Historically, we perhaps have not engaged as fully as we might have done in relation to some of our academies. Most of Shropshire's children are educated in academies, and whilst we recognise the autonomy of academies, we also recognise that whilst they are academies' pupils, they are our children. And I think if I go through the next element of the report, one of the things which we're seeking to develop is a new strategy to support the challenge, the support, and where necessary, the intervention in relation to settings, including unregistered alternative provision, including aspects around childcare providers, and we've been very active in this space in the last 12 months. Outcomes in Shropshire with respect to pupil performance are generally quite poor, with the exception of early years foundation stage. We've been given a challenging target from the DFE for all children in Shropshire to reach a good level of development of 77% in 2 years. At the moment, our figure sits some way behind that. And there is a real challenge, as my colleague will talk about later, in relation to the desire to support inclusive mainstream education, as well as to try and weigh that against the desire for positive outcomes at the end of reception. But our outcomes generally are positive in relation to that which children achieve at the end of reception. Similarly, in relation to phonics, there's been improvement over time. Where the particular challenges exist are in pupil performance in Key Stage 2 at the end of Year 6 and at the end of Key Stage 4 with respect to GCSE performance. Shropshire is now currently bottom of the West Midlands with respect to Key Stage 2 outcomes. I don't think that's a place that Shropshire have ever been in before. And the outcomes in the combined measure of reading, writing and maths have fallen for the third consecutive year. I would note, highlighting my point previously about where we need to put the challenge back to the sector, is in relation to the difference in the performance between maintained schools and academies. In every measure bar writing, maintained schools outperform academies. That for me is one of the reasons why we need to be increasingly in the space to be able to ensure that we're supporting all of Shropshire's children by developing a really cohesive picture in terms of how that education challenge, support and intervention is put together. And I would also include Key Stage 4 within that narrative as well. And you can see there in terms of Key Stage 4 outcomes, how the Attainment 8 measure, that measure of attainment across a range of key subjects in Key Stage 4, has fallen again for the third consecutive year. All but one of Shropshire's secondary schools are part of multi-academy trusts or are standalone academies. Moving on, the other aspect of this report covers the elements around securing access to education provision. And this is a positive picture. Our early years providers are good. They receive good outcomes with respect to Ofsted inspections, which compares favourably to national averages. We're also very successful in enabling Shropshire's families to access early years education when they need it. At the other end, in terms of outcomes for post-16, we've been tremendously successful in tackling the proportion of children who are not in education, employment or training, who are not, or who are more worryingly, potentially not known. We've reduced this massively over time. Our staff in this area are very proactive in promoting the exchange of information between secondary schools and post-16 providers in order to be able to identify children who may be vulnerable and those that may need some encouragements to be able to consider what their post-16 options are going to be. As a result, we're now consistently one of the highest performing authorities in the country and in the West Midlands with respect to the proportion of pupils who are not in education, employment or training or who are not known. That's a change over time. It never used to be that. At least 10 years ago it wasn't, and it's certainly something which staff have worked very hard to address. With respect to the performance of the virtual school, again, this has been a success story. Again, for the 5th consecutive year, no child who is looked after by Shropshire has been permanently excluded. There's been strong work in ensuring that the proportion of personal education plans that are completed are completed in a timely fashion and to a high quality. And the children who are looked after ensure that strong work takes place to ensure that they attend school regularly. Again, similarly, in terms of the outcomes for the children who are also at the end of post-16, who are not in education, employment and training, also performs well when compared to national and local figures as well. With respect to the work in terms of promoting inclusion with respect to reducing permanent exclusions, this again is an area of success. So exclusions in Shropshire reduced massively from 81 exclusions in 23-24 to 41 last year. That was a significant reduction, and it really reflected the impact of our innovative work around the additional grants that we've made available to schools to support inclusive practice in schools to prevent more children being excluded. I'm really pleased to say that in the last this term, the numbers of permanent exclusions have fallen again, and we are down to 1 permanent exclusion in Shropshire since September. That's a number which is 1 too many in my mind, but it's significantly less than it has been in previous years. The reason for that is really proactive work by education and access staff, the impact of pupil planning meetings, and the work of the impact of the additional funds that we've made available to schools through the additional funds to support schools in setting up their own provision. We've now expanded that using the high needs block to be able to provide opportunities in primary schools to also tackle the level of suspensions. The number of permanent exclusions in primaries isn't as high as secondaries, but we do recognise there's more work to do to reduce the level of suspensions. The other tool in the box to tackle that is some additional outreach support, so we can provide additional specialist advice to support schools in supporting children with additional social and emotional mental health needs. Again, this is in its early stages, and it's funded through the Department for Education's AP and Change programme. And again, the purpose of it is about promoting inclusive mainstream practice to keep children in schools and to provide support to staff to develop their expertise in managing more complex challenges. So there's been investment in staff which has been funded through the AP and Change programme with respect to that. In terms of school admissions team have worked incredibly hard to be able to ensure that all applications have been processed within statutory timescales, and again are currently working to be able to support secondary transition in advance of the national deadline at the end of this month. Again, the work's been really positive there in being able to ensure that children and families have assurance around their futures in terms of schools that they'll be looking to attend. So I'll come to the end of my section. The only other aspect of my team that I will reflect on is the aspect around supporting inclusive practice in schools before I hand over to my colleague in terms of aspects around the EHCP team. One of the innovations that we've had over the last 12 months is a new post of education quality advisors for SEND and AP. And these have been really effective in supporting the expertise within schools to support children with a range of additional learning needs. They've also been very effective in supporting the work of our hubs, our resourced provisions, supporting inclusive mainstream practice in line with government expectations around what that should look like, and also supporting schools in terms of what the new challenges will be with respect to the new Ofsted inspection framework, which launches in November. But I will pause there and take any questions that councillors might have.
Thank you very much, Cyril, for that very detailed report and very analytical as well. We've got some questions first. Thank you.
Two things. You didn't specifically mention home educated children when you said it includes all schools in Shropshire. I mean, I don't know whether that's included in one of the other things, but not necessarily the looked after children, are they? And there's always been a bit of a worry about home educated children in terms of falling under the radar for all sorts of reasons. So does that come under your remit? Could we make that a bit clearer?
The specific aspects around home education doesn't fall under directly my remit. It falls under my colleague Joe Kelly's, but certainly I can speak to that. Obviously, we know that we've got that rise in the proportion of electively home educated pupils. I know that the EAS service have been increasingly more proactive in looking to be able to provide that monitoring. There's a brand new electively home education policy which makes that clear link between EHE and safeguarding and the additional risks with respect to that. But that's certainly something which, again, in terms of reflecting the challenge for education for all pupils, we can look to ensure is included and reflected in our strategy. Then it's a holistic document as possible. But certainly in terms of the work around the policy development and the work to support the monitoring of electively home educated children to ensure they're getting a good deal and that they're safe, that's certainly been an area of growth with respect to the work of the AS team.
And if I just build on that, Councillor, as well. So within the report, there's a section that covers electively home educated children, young people and children missing education. It's at the bottom of page 26. I do appreciate it's a long report. Yeah. This aspect is also inspected and checked as part of the ILACS inspection, because essentially, whilst it covers education, the quality of education, essentially the local authority's duty is around ensuring safety and well-being for these young people. So it's picked up as part of the ILACS inspection judgment. So there is absolutely work underway on that one, and it may be that Chair, we next time we bring Joe Kelly, who can provide a bit more detail and bring that to life in terms of the work. But I can reassure you that that work is underway and has been underway ahead of the Wellbeing in Schools Bill that is currently working its way through Parliament.
The other thing, going back to what I said before about additional houses, so I've got an additional 200 houses coming along in Severn Valley over the next few years. That's going to produce quite a lot of children as well. And people always say it was all very well the houses, what about the infrastructure? We're being told that the birth rate in the country is falling, but obviously the numbers in school isn't necessarily falling when you've got these sort of developments happening all over the place. So how are you making sure that those figures are included in your projections of school numbers coming through over the next sort of 10 years?
My colleague Andy Nichols, who's the service manager with respect to the education capacity and what have you, monitors that, and there's very, very close links between that and the world of school admissions to ensure that actually we've got suitable school places to support all of Shropshire's children. So that's the monitoring of where there are planning applications going in, where there are large developments such as the one that you described over the river Buildwas. Yes. So again, it's monitoring that, working out how many houses that those children, how many children will be likely to will be the yield from those sorts of developments, to feed them into planning decisions around potential new schools, the use of SIL money and Section 106 money to be able to determine where those pinch points are.
Because the difficulty with that is currently your child was born here, so in 5 years' time they're going to be in school here. You don't know whether the children in those houses are going to be newborn 2, 6, 10, 15 until they arrive. Yes, it's very difficult to predict.
There are challenges with respect to that, but obviously knowing there's particular formulae that we can apply to particular developments is able to give us with a reasonable degree of accuracy knowledge around the numbers of the houses that will be a particular development will the number of children that a particular development will generate, so we can use that to then be able to inform decisions around additional places, whether that's in relation to additional school buildings, expansion to existing sites, or all those sorts of things.
Sorry, that's
yeah, thanks. I agree with you. I think it's really deeply concerning that excuse me, attainment levels are dropping across both primary and secondary education alongside academisation. Given the number of academies that we have in Shropshire, what practical influence does the local authority have over improving school outcomes for children? And how are we holding academies accountable?
This is a key part of the strategy that we're currently developing at the moment, and what you've touched upon is absolutely at the nub of what the need is. Historically, that's not happened, and increasingly there is an expectation from the DfE that we should be increasingly in that space around providing that challenge back to academies. So what's currently in draft form at the moment is a new education excellence strategy. This has currently been shared with the sector, and I've had conversations with CEOs of all, in the process of having conversations with the CEOs of all Shropshire's multi-academy trusts, to say, look, as I mentioned before, these are your pupils, but they are our children. We need to ensure that we're having robust, constructive and challenging conversations around what the outcomes for those children, those families are looking like, in order to be able to provide some supportive challenge to those schools about how they might seek to improve. What I don't want to do is to suggest for one moment that we have got a huge resource to do this. As I mentioned, in 2022, the school monitoring and brokering grant, which was the financial support that we had to be able to do this, was removed. The only resource we have is the dedicated schools grant, which supports maintained schools. So we are trying to spin straw into gold to an extent, using members of staff that are already supporting other areas of work as well. So to do that is going to be challenging, but it's a conversation that absolutely needs to take place in order to be able to support the best outcomes. So to give you a flavour of what I'm proposing is around an annual conversation with CEOs around the performance of their academies, and then some visits of half the academies into Shropshire schools to be able to see what's going on under the bonnet of these institutions. But to suggest it is a comprehensive system of monitoring would not be true, because there isn't the resource to support that.
Thank you very much for your response, and I agree with the questions. Councillor Duncan, in Shropshire, we've got academies, we've got local authority schools, and we can understand the challenge which you now have. With a limited team, limited role, and say what actually happens in academies. Is there anything further as a council we can do to support you in actually pursuing the data we've got in schools? As you've identified, Key Stage 2 is the lowest in our sort of neighbouring families, which I think is the first has ever happened. Children leaving Key Stage 3 with the 8 data lower than national data as well. So is there anything we can do as a council to support you and your team in this way?
I will never pass up the offer of additional.
I hope not. No.
Additional resource.
We feel very strongly about this. Just like you've said, they're pupils in school, but they are children. I think that is really going to stick with me, Mr. Rowe. That's very pertinent for us all, and we've got a responsibility to ensure that each child in this authority makes the necessary progress we want them to have to leave Key Stage 4 with good outcomes and future. And if this is not the case, which is clearly not moving in this direction at the moment, we need to intervene one way or another to try and support you and your team to help this.
And I think if we get that right as a from a council point of view, we are in a position to save money in the long run. Because if we promote positive outcomes for our children, we support the economic development of the council, of the county, we reduce the impact on criminal justice system. By early intervention, we can prevent negative outcomes for families and what have you later on in life. It's win-win. But we need to ensure that the work of this team is not a toothless tiger in the need to ensure that we are able to promote great outcomes for all our children. And that's what's at the mission. That's the mission of this. And I think for the first time, I've been in education in Shropshire for over 20 years. And I think one of the things which I think is really welcome as part of this approach is the potential to have a strategy which actually has a high status in the council to be able to promote great outcomes.
Absolutely. I know your roles has changed very much over the years as well with the standards. The Department for Education are responsible for academies ultimately now. Can they be informed of our concerns?
Absolutely, and I think it's about the status that has, but we also need to be absolutely realistic about the funding challenges that we faced as an authority. Shropshire is one of the lowest funded authorities in the country. We're a member of the F40 group, of the lowest funded 40 funded local authorities within that. If we take the aspects around the support that we're trying to put in place in terms of SEN, we are 15th in that lowest 40 group of schools. So to suggest this is going to happen without any additional resource, obviously I appreciate that from a central government perspective, this will require some additional investment if the expectation from central government is that we are delivering positive outcomes, we need to ensure we have a resource to be able to deliver that as well.
Joe was referring to as well is, even though we haven't got the resources ourselves to do it, informing the DFE that we are concerned about the performance of certain academies in this authority, which is not cost related. It's just an information sharing between Shropshire and the DFE, which might add value and support to our case without any financial constraints. Yeah, it's just open to.
If I could just build on that Chair, I think that's a pertinent point. I think it's also worth us leveraging in the RISE advisors. So these are the Raising School Standards advisors that are outlined in the report. And I know John and John's team already work hand in glove with those colleagues. And I think it's fair to say that programme is emerging. It's not well embedded or established yet, but it will develop. But I think fundamentally there is a dichotomy here in terms of what the DFE expect and what the DFE fund, having removed the central managing brokering grant. So the responsibility for local authorities is very clear in terms of maintaining schools. John's team is doing that on a skeleton staff currently and doing that well. I suppose the challenge for us all and via the Council Hall as our elected member is how we square that circle, if we can indeed square that circle, given the financial challenges of local authority. So that may be, Chair, something we bring back to a subsequent meeting as the strategy develops. I was also going to propose it may well be worth members having sight of that strategy, actually, even in the formative stages as it currently stands. So if we can do that, John, that would be helpful, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I come from Church Stretton, and I was a governor at the primary school up until just before COVID, and he was dropping to just under 300 pupils. In September, he had 83 pupils. And like this lady said about housing, that's something we don't get at Church Stretton because people retire in, our youngsters wanting housing, the people downsizing have got the money, so our youngsters can't, buy those properties. I had a word with both heads. He's gone from 10 classes to 3. My fear is that school could be under threat at some time in the future if we don't do something. I've taken this up with the leader and deputy leader, but when I had a word with the head from the secondary school or the academy, he turned around and said he's doing quite well because people have heard that he's a good academy and they travel into it. But he said he's noticed year on year how the numbers from Church Stretton Primary fall. It's really serious in our town.
That is a challenge, and particularly in relation to Church Stretton, St Lawrence's primary there, we have put additional support in. It obviously is a maintained school in terms of being able to support obviously the financial management of the school in terms of through the work of the school finance officer, as well as enhanced visits through the school improvement team as it was there. And I was previously the attached advisor for St Lawrence's. The other piece of work that we've done specifically in relation to that school, but in other schools as well, is the development of our resource provision. So through the high needs capital allocation, we've been able to invest in schools like St Lawrence's, which have received £60,000 worth of additional funding in the last 12 months at that school, specifically to expand the provision to support children with additional needs. So again, that's something which obviously not necessarily going to compensate for the demographic challenges within the Church Stretton area, but it will look to be able to say actually what support can this school provide to children in a wider area with respect to children who may have additional needs as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. I know when I was talking to him, he said if it wasn't for the SEND children, his figures had been a lot lower. And thank you for what you do there. Thanks ever so much.
We will take one final question from Thomas now. Moving on.
So if I could do 2 quick questions quickly. So the first one is fairly simple. Is the data here adequate to show effectively that academies are the cause for the deterioration in grades, or could it be external factors, COVID lockdown, something like that, that is actually the cause, but it's just the way it works in academies basically has exacerbated the actual issue.
Yeah, I think that's a fair challenge. I'm not suggesting for one moment that academisation is the root of this. I think what is fair to say is that COVID has impacted. It did impact on this council, this authority, because particularly in terms of the way COVID affected Shropshire, particularly in relation, we were a late. The second wave of COVID impacted on schools in Shropshire in a far greater way than elsewhere in the West Midlands. The first wave of COVID didn't impact so much on Shropshire schools and Shropshire children, but it did in that second wave, leading to a lot of absence. And again, I think what we're seeing is the sort of the effect of that quite long tail of COVID in terms of pupil performance outcomes. And you're absolutely right. Where we've got most of Shropshire children within academies, that will also include academies that have joined multi-academy trusts because of concerns around declining standards. So, you know, I don't want to imply a causal relationship between academies and outcomes, but what we need to recognise is that where most of Shropshire's children are in academies, it is incumbent on us to ensure that we're putting that challenge back.
Thank you, very good answer. Right. And I'll preface this in that I used to work in education. I taught classrooms, and I found that when it comes to expulsions, they are never positive. They're always negative. However, what worries me is I have been in classrooms where you only need one student to bring down the entire grade of that class. And what I'm particularly worried is, although you want effectively zero expulsions, I'm worried if you do not have the infrastructure to implement the alternatives for those students, you may be basically forcing entire classes to take on students that are negative to the class because they're bringing down everyone's grades. I'm just wondering, what kind of infrastructure do you have to take that individual student out of the classroom, even temporarily, to say, look, we're going to basically educate you in a manner that works for you, but isn't affecting the vast majority of students in the classroom? Because I've seen some awful examples of where that has happened.
And sheer force of will won't be sufficient to ensure that that can happen. And it needs to be backed up with two things. It needs to be backed up with resource. So we need to use resources such as the Inclusion Development Grant. Now, this is a Shropshire specific grant. It's not a product of national government. It's something which has been developed by ourselves. We've put £600,000 into Shropshire secondary schools to enable them to design pieces of work, projects, exactly what you've just described, which will support the needs of Shropshire's, of those children that may have additional challenges, in order for them to be able to be kept within school, because you're absolutely right that the outcomes of a permanently excluded child are really poor in terms of their later life chances, massively affected by permanent exclusion. But let's see if we work within that school where we know that they are safe, where we know that we can provide that support to them in order to do that through that resource. The other aspect is around expertise and knowledge for staff, and that's why initiatives such as the outreach programme that we're rolling out will provide that support and that additional expertise for staff to be able to support children's needs better. And I think, if my colleague Jo Kelly was to come to the next scrutiny meeting, then she leads that team. And I think she'd be in a really great position to be able to provide an update to that, because I think, in fairness, that aspect of the work is at a relatively early stage of development. But yeah, absolutely, in terms of the impact, it's having a positive effect.
Great answers, thank you.
Right. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Rowe. And thank you to your team as well for all the hard work which you're doing as well. We'll now move on to SEN.
To Lisa and John may do a bit of light as well as some of these aspects.
Okay, I have a red light on, so I presume everybody can hear me. So I am Lisa Taylor, Principal Educational Psychologist and Preventative Lead. So the Education, Health and Care Plan team sit under my management structure, so I'm here to talk about their performance today. Excuse me, I'll just find my voice first. So What we know is that the number of Shropshire plans are increasing, and they have been increasing for a little while. And this isn't unique to Shropshire. This is a national picture around the increase in education, health and care plans and the challenges that we face in Shropshire. The team was completely restructured, as most of you, I'm sure, were aware of, and have been fully staffed since the 1st of May. So we did, during the restructure part, aim to keep some of our agency staff in post. However, with the change of the post from being individual coordinators around the cases and individual plan writers to combining both of those roles, so there were overall case officers, our agency staff then felt that they didn't have expertise in one area or the other and only have to give a week's notice effectively. And so they chose to leave in the process of us restructuring, which then meant we had a little bit of a deficit in staff, which impacted. That was a challenge at the time between January and May, whilst we were out recruiting to a full team. We now do have a full team as of the 1st of May. Some of that, some of the challenges there is that they come from Senko roles, teaching backgrounds. They weren't case officers, so we've put in training for those case officers. And I have to say the team are doing incredibly well. We're getting quite a lot of compliments into the team now around their communication, their understanding, their empathy with our children and families. And we are increasing, now that the team are settled in post training, we are increasing the number of education, health and care plans that are going out. So our dip down around our 20 weeks to only 10% in March, back up to 20% in May, and then that is rising as well. So it's still sitting just above the 20%, but we've made a few changes around how we quality assure the plans. So sometimes the plans are being written but being stuck at that quality assurance level. So obviously we want to hand out really good quality education, health and care plans. And whilst the new case officers were being trained in post, every single one of those plans were quality assured. But as we shifted and moved and trained the case officers, they were then we shifted it to 1 in 5 plans as long as all their plans were being, and that increased our output then of education, health and care plans, and is now increasing the plans that go out within the 20 weeks. So yes, there was a bit of a decline, but we're on a upwards trajectory. We've typically kept our 52 plus week plans very low, and we carefully monitor that. We've got a little bit of a focus on the 30 plus week plans at the moment, but that is in line with our 20 week sort of recovery as well. So yes, so we're working through that. I can see my PowerPoint up and I was talking through the report. Shall I talk through my PowerPoint instead? Would that be slightly easier? Okay, so I mean, it covers most of these sorts of things anyway on here. So yeah, you can see in there on the first slide around the 20-week recovery that actually we've done a lot of work around quality assurance framework and how we do that, reviewing caseload as well for the officers. And then ongoing work around November is we are working in terms of looking at annual reviews and sort of shifting those on and reflecting those and moving those sorts of forward. So we've had a little bit of a timeline in terms of increasing timeliness and our recovery plan. Our annual review recovery team. So we've had plans that haven't had annual review updates for a significant period of time. So this work started prior to me being in post, and obviously part of my role now is to monitor our annual review recovery team. So our annual review recovery team do our action plans pre the 1st of January 2025. So they have got set targets, and we are forecasting in terms of how many we can work through, get through in order to make sure that those are actions. And part of the reason why it's really important that we continue this work and that we get this done as quickly as possible is because actually when something isn't working well and a school calls an annual review, it's because things aren't working well for the school, the other young people, the individual person. And obviously if that is left, there's a deterioration in terms of need, which then means that we might potentially be moving our children and young people then into independent specialist provisions, whereas we wouldn't have had to have done if we were sort of on time around sort of annual review recovery. So we are looking at the moment of making sure that we don't create another backlog with more recent annual reviews whilst we were training and getting our new education, health and care plan case officers into post, as well as making sure that we're completely caught up with all of the sort of backlog of our annual reviews as well. So putting extra resource in, and we're looking at putting extra resource in to do that as quickly as possible, ideally by May 2026. So we're just going through the process of that at the moment. And then also we've got some case officers who have just started on in September, and these are fully trained case officers. They came straight in, knew what they were doing, but they're looking at transition points. So our children that are in our specialist provisions, in Shropshire, our independent specialist provisions, at which point could we maybe move them back into their local communities, with the establishment linking into John's team around sufficiency planning and resource bases and hubs. So, you know, part of their role is about having our own children in our own communities, and that inclusive practice, which is a national agenda at the moment. So it's just important to highlight that. Some of the pressures in the HCP team, which is why we have a barrier slide, and why I'm going to be talking about educational psychology service as well, is that obviously when an education, health and care plan request for assessment comes in, if it's a yes to assess our panels, then we request advice from certain services, which you can see on that slide. So that advice goes out. So obviously if health aren't involved, they send something back to say we can't contribute, we haven't been involved, we can't provide any advice. However, certain other services, like educational psychology, for example, will write a report for every single child that goes through statutory assessment. However, if we've got reports not coming in on time due to resourcing difficulties, then it impacts the timeliness of the HCP team. So it's a consequence and a knock-on effect, which is why it's important, I think, to just sort of flag that up here. So it is a very complex picture nationally. So number of requests are rising, you know, and that is a national picture. Complexity of our children, young people, they're definitely presenting with significantly more complex difficulties, particularly around neurodiversity. Again, that's a national picture. And also we have a lot of parents, education settings, rightly so, that put a lot of challenge back around consultations that we send out around draft plans and specific things they want in it, etc., etc. So it's about maintaining that balance of keeping a good relationship, those touch points, keeping in touch with, you know, our children, families, schools, but also challenge them and just saying, no, this is the stopping point really, because we've got to move forwards. So finalising plans, for example, but giving parents their appeal rights, for example, rather than that constant backwards and forwards, which impacts our key data. So yeah, I have just popped a slide on there, which I'm not going to go through in great detail, around the education psychology service, because it was modelled on 137 statutory assessments back in 2018-19. We now have 700 requests for statutory assessments from the education psychology service, and that has been average over the last 2 years, 700 requests. And the service isn't, we we can't pick them all up. We just don't have capacity to do that, alongside doing some preventative work to try and stop those requests coming in. So we are a traded service as well, educational psychology, and so we have lots of opportunity to trade with our schools other settings provisions. We can't necessarily do that, so we are having to turn down quite a lot, which could also be preventative work as well at the same time, and prevent the EHCPs coming in. So it feels like we're in a little bit of a vicious cycle at the moment, and it's reflecting, I think, today, hence some possible questions for overview and scrutiny. It's reflecting on how do we move forwards, how do we break ourselves out of that vicious cycle and do the right things for our children, families, young people in Shropshire, because they're often very reliant on these statutory services in order to meet needs, which will then impact upon family home life as well. So yeah, so it's working on that. So yeah, that's part of the impact of it. We've obviously got resource and implications, which is one of the sort of questions up there. We do have, you know, alongside John's team, we work very closely together in terms of thinking about what we put in prior to getting to the HCP process. So we're obviously working along those sorts of lines, which is everything John has just shared. And obviously we have local, national influences, the new white paper for education, for example, coming out, the ideas around inclusive practice that are likely to be in that paper as well, and how we're working towards that. So lots of challenges at the moment, I would say, but we're working very hard to try and meet those and to have plans for those.
Thank you very much indeed for that very detailed, very comprehensive report. It's encouraging to see that you developed the SEN team as well, and that's moving in the right direction. You're catching up to the HCPs and reviews, you're keeping on top of as well with the high quality of standards you've got there as well. The education psychologists, you know, they're in great demand. And I think you've clarified that situation very clearly. If you haven't got the education psychologists, you can't do the assessments, so therefore that delays the process. But you clearly do all you possibly can to actually try and amend it. You know, so thank you very much for that. Questions from any members, please? Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was really informative. I suppose my question is around the dedicated schools grant, and obviously each plan it places a legal obligation on the council. Looking at the report, I think it's pushed the high needs budget almost 20 million into the red, and contributing to a dedicated schools grant deficit of nearly 37 million. So obviously that at the moment is masked by the government override. But so my question really is, what is, or how are we going to come up with a realistic plan to make our SENS and high needs system financially sustainable before 2028? Yeah, and how confident are we that the current EHCP growth can be contained really without further risking the council's stability at the moment?
Shall I pick that up to start with? And I think, yeah. John, I know you probably got views as well, I'm sure. I think it's an excellent question, and I think it's one that's beyond Shropshire, if I'm really honest. So nationally, we are all seeing, and in the report, we've included some links to the most recent national reports. What the most recent was from the 24th of September, and it outlines the billions of pounds of deficit that sit across the country in this space. And I won't go into the individual authority; it wouldn't be appropriate to do. But for Shropshire, that's compounded or exacerbated, depending where you look at it, by the challenge within our mainstream funding space. As John stated previously, mainstream schools, generally their funding levels are very, very low. So if you take a secondary school, the smallest secondary school in Shropshire, that equates to about £250,000. The largest, about 3/4. You can get a lot of staff, resources, support, all of the good things we want to see in settings with that amount of resource. That's just not comparable. Schools need that. We know that. We're hearing that. And they look to the DSG high needs block to prop some of those things up, because clearly we are challenging, rightly, them to be able to meet needs of children and young people with that varying and increasing level of SEND complexity and need. So it's again, it's a challenge. How do we do that? So unfortunately, I'm not able to provide this is the exam question that we can respond to. We are working through a lot of development activity. Lots of it is articulated in the paper around the phrase inclusive mainstream. You're going to hear that more and more, and we expect that to be writ large within the education white paper, and whenever that comes through. John may want to just bring that to life a little bit for you, but I think there's a real challenge there. And within the report, we've demonstrated, I think, that dissonance between setting really high levels of target rightly, but an increasingly complex and varied group of young people that are going to be working their way through the examination system. I'm not entirely sure how those two things join actually, and what that looks like, and we're not seeing examples of that coming through from Quay as to how they're going to mitigate some of that. At the minute, there's lots of things that just expecting the same examination system to work for the young people that are coming through. So there's a real dissonance, because if you were in a special school environment, actually you would be able to disapply or apply only for certain qualifications. That's a real challenge for mainstream schools to be able to do that, and actually they're viewed in different ways when they do that, by parents, by regulators, by Ofqual and others, and their performance tables are different in accordance. So I think we're moving to a space where all of those questions we need to be very curious about and consider what that's going to look like, not just in Shropshire, but locally and nationally moving forward. It's a real challenge, and I think I often use the example where from school background, if you're in a school and you had a kitchen that was set up to meet 100 children every single day in staff, well, if you double the amount of children going through that kitchen, it's going to feel really difficult, and you might run out of food and people are going to get grumpy, and it's going to be really, really difficult. Imagine you double that number again and double it again. People are not going to be happy. You're not going to have enough food. You're going to be spreading all of those things around all of those people 4 times fewer than you had originally planned. That's where the system is. And I think there's a real reality in that in terms of what we're trying to do. And what we're trying to do as officers and the council per se is be honest as we can be with families, work with them directly, listen to them, because their views and their voice is really, really important. And I think colleagues in the teams that are directly working with those families day in, day out, school settings working with those families, they are hearing that directly from those people on the ground. And when we see things become challenging, that's when my colleagues, the last Sonia's teams in terms of children's social care, and as the Director of Children's Services, seeing that as a whole, it's a really difficult picture. So the theme I think we're hearing today is around the early intervention prevention. The more we can do to avoid those escalations occurring, prevent those challenges emerging, whether that be through suspension reductions, exclusion reductions, managing demand earlier, supporting families, including those adults in those houses to manage their challenges, it all helps. It's a really, really complex picture. I'll hand to John or Lisa if they want to add any specific details or bring that to life, but that might be a separate question for Schools Forum to pick up as well.
Yeah, thanks, David. It is certainly something that is very much on the radar, excuse me, of Schools Forum in relation to the deficit that Shropshire now finds itself in, and that growth of deficit. There's 2 things that have fueled it. One is the demand for independent, non-maintained special. Again, going back to the need to put that challenge back into the system, and we have been doing this, where some of that independent, non-maintained provision has not been of a good quality, we've challenged that. But absolutely, if we're spending £17 million from that block of what that looks like, we need to be getting into that space, and we need to be making sure that we're getting good value for money for those children that are accessing it. The other bit is also around the increase in the demand in terms of mainstream SEN, which David's just reflected, and I think this increase in demand is what's fueling that. One of the things to provide a bit of some examples of some of the things we're doing to mitigate that, we're providing, before children get an EHCP or as an alternative to an EHCP, additional resource early through the early years intervention and advice guidance, which we're putting in place. Again, it's not a statutory element, it's a Shropshire specific one. Not as a hoop to jump through for schools, absolutely not, but as a way where there may be children in need of short-term intervention, which don't necessarily need an EHCP, we can provide that resource to settings and schools earlier and for a more sustained period of time to potentially prevent the need for an EHCP, which they'll then keep till they're 25. That might not always be appropriate or necessary. And similarly, in a school-based context, the use of a graduated support pathway for schools to, again, to receive a sum of money to support pieces of work for short-term, 2 years, pieces of work in relation to where there may be specific needs. So that work, the work around inclusive mainstream, providing technology and expertise out into schools, so staff in schools are better geared up to be able to meet children's needs better, to again reduce the needs for expensive interventions down the track. But as David reflected, this is a system which the National Audit Office recognised was an issue of national crisis. Shropshire's room for manoeuvre within this space is kind of limited, and it's well above everyone's pay grade to try and seek to influence that. But certainly we can try and be the masters of our own destiny to the extent that we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I do totally recognise, that this is a national issue, and lots of other councils are facing exactly the same problems. But I think that also there is something around the hubs in mainstream schools, and there is something around the early intervention programmes, and just understanding actually what the return on investment, as it were, might be. How much is it saving us in expensive interventions later down the line?
We need to be realistic there, because where we have a child that may be accessing an independent school, even if they were supported within a hub or resource provision, they're still going to require a level of resource above and beyond that which a mainstream pupil would necessarily receive. It's only going to be the differential between the two. So we don't need to sort of overplay it really in terms of this being the silver bullet to solve the DSG deficit. It won't. And I think it's an element of reflecting back to DFE the scale of the challenge and the impact that a rural authority poses in terms of being able to support children's needs well.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to take this opportunity of thanking the team for this report, and what the report reflects is exactly the position that we're in, and outlines for members the challenges that are faced with Shropshire Council at the moment, and also it displays the innovative and transformable things that you guys are doing to make things work with a limited amount of money. And when I say limited amount of money, it's very, very limited, and I'm the first one to realise that. I can say to the committee that the work that's going on behind the scenes, particularly with the SEND and AP transformation and the work that's provided, the strategy that's putting in place and benchmarking all the good things that are happening, particularly communications with parents, which is leading to the prevention of elements of going forward, which does in the long run display that we're going to save a lot of money for Shropshire Council, and that work is really, really important, and I'm really pleased that the team are able to be very open and transparent about the whole thing, so everyone can see that work that's going on and understand it, importantly, because I think a lot of people don't understand what goes on behind the scenes and the challenges that are out there. We know there's a national challenge, there's a national crisis. We're hoping that the white paper will go some way to address that. I'm a bit worried how that might look, but I'm quite worried how that might come together. But it is a massive challenge, and as we've heard from David and Lisa and John, who've painted a very clear picture of the way the land lies for us at the moment. We just got to continue doing the very best for our young people in Shropshire, and I know that we're doing that. And our team are providing that for Shropshire under increasing challenges, which get greater every day from what I can see. They're not going away. It's just how we deal with them. So I'd like to thank the team personally for their excellent work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? We shall move on. Children's early health and social care.
Thank you, Chair. I'll hand over to Sonia Miller to step through the aspects of this report.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sonia Miller. I'm the Service Director for Children and Young People, and I have responsibility for the early help services and the sort of statutory functions around children's safeguarding, child protection, and our looked after children. In children's social care, as you're aware, we're highly regulated and we've recently had an inspection, and we have a vast array of data that we have to provide on a regular basis. And we report nationally, regionally, around a vast array of measures. So this report tries to summarise some of the key performance areas to try and show the sort of flow through, if you like, of children through our service. And obviously there is a differential between the early help data, but how that impacts on demand for the number of children who are in the statutory section of the system. So the statutory intervention starts at a point of referral and go through from sort of that to the child protection investigations, children looked after, and the outcomes of those long-term plans. I think it's worth saying in terms of impact and outcome at the moment, we currently have the lowest number of children open in that statutory sector for over 6 years. And therefore, it's a key indicator for us that the investment into the early help services and the prevention services is starting to work. You never get that evidence quickly when you make that investment. It is a 5 to 10 year kind of turnaround. But we've sustained below 2,000 children open to the statutory function now for the last sort of year or so. And I think that's key, because I think it's very worthwhile remembering that if the children are open to me, it's because they've been significantly hurt in some way, emotionally, physically, traumatized, etc. And at the point whereby we had, sort of much higher numbers of that, it's very worrying that those numbers of children are being hurt at any one time in a county such as Shropshire. What it's also indicating is that we've got good application of threshold, and that was found during the inspection with our key partners. So what we are able to do is picking up that harm or the need of children earlier and being able to get them access to early help. And that was an area of challenge for us, particularly during COVID. And we saw that reflected in the huge increase in looked after children's numbers between 2020 and 2022. And I believe that we're really sort of starting to see the turn in that curve now. Our data, as I say, there's a huge range of it. It's quite difficult to sort of pin down which are the kind of key measures to kind of give to yourselves as committee. So if there's any other aspects that you would like us to explore with you moving forward, please do say so. The inspection confirmed two really key things for us. One is that our data is of extremely high quality. They have a team of data analysts that kind of go through our data quality, and we came back with an in excess of 99.5% data quality. And that's really key for us. So we actually know that what we're reporting is hugely accurate and does reflect the position for our children. The second key factor that was found during this inspection and every other previous inspection is that they've never found a child looked after that shouldn't have been. And I think that's, again, really key in terms of the way that decisions are made and how that decision making is made. So whilst it is a concern that we've got a significantly higher number of children looked after than we had previous to COVID, actually there's nothing to suggest that they're the wrong children and they shouldn't be within our looked after system. So the report takes you through the sort of data that supports the transformation around early help and what we call EHAST, our early help and support team, and the changes that we made to that offer going back, started sort of just over 2 years ago now. And it takes you through to, if we look at 4.178, where we're starting to see that movement that I've described. So we're starting to see that increase in referrals into early help and the impact of those, the decrease in referrals for statutory assessment into children's social care, and what we're seeing is a shift in the patterns of children looked after, starting to be looked after, reducing. And we're starting to be able to kind of see that trend data over time. The report takes you through that in much more sort of like detail, and it shares screenshots from the report that Ofsted looked at. So you've got the kind of Ofsted lens through this report at this moment in time. Each one of these is quite high level data, and it shows you the trend data. So uses the per 10,000 rate as the benchmarking comparator. And below this, it's a whole other set of data that sits below each of these. So as I say, if you have particular areas you wish to explore, then that is possible to do so. It's key to note that at 4.188, our re-referral rate is very low. So obviously we monitor and track that because obviously a re-referral means that the intervention you've provided the first time round probably hasn't had the impact that you wanted to have. You see we benchmark well below Stat Neighbours and our England averages, and that continues to drop. Performance is managed on a weekly basis in children's social care. There are weekly performance meetings at a child data level at all points of those key decision making. So we do maintain ourselves in that high performing level throughout the time. It's not just a state of affairs for an Ofsted inspection. We do see variations in that performance, and so for example over the summer holidays you always get a dip in assessment timeliness, etc. It's because of due to leave, etc., but it always picks back up pretty quickly afterwards. We're also seeing a much more accurate trend, I believe, in relation to Section 47 inquiries. So that's the point whereby a referral's come in, a child's actually been harmed in some way, or it's believed that they're likely to have been harmed in some way, and it requires police, health, social care, schools to sit around the table and say, what's going on for this child? Why is this level of harm happening? You'll see in the graph on 4.191 that we're now seeing, instead of a kind of sustained trajectory that we've had done previously of high levels of Section 47s, we're seeing a much greater variation through the school term. And I think that that is indicative of two things. One is we should see a variation rather than a sustained level. That probably means a much more accurate application of threshold by partners and the referrals in and the difference between a contact and a referral. But it also shows the protective nature of schools. So we see harm increasing during school holidays. And I think that's really important when it comes to working with our colleagues in schools around exclusion rates, children in attendance, monitoring that. So we now have a joint working group with the virtual school, our colleagues in education and children's social care that look at attendance rates, impact all children with a social worker, what's the performance across their education, and electively home educated. So Councillor Coleman, that sits in the space, those electively home educated children sit in that space slightly between early help and child in need, and they're monitored through what we call working together meetings. The report goes on to look at like the next major decision point for a child, which is like assessments and how those are completed within 45 working days. I can tell you the current performance of those is well above 90% as of this week, and it usually fluctuates between sort of 90 and 95% as high performance. And then the two slides at 4.197 shows the comparison between where we were in 2022 for the previous inspection to the performance that we had in 2025 for that inspection. So it kind of shows you that difference. All of this is tracked in a live self-evaluation framework. So at any point in time, we can provide a self-evaluation of where children's social care is at any point. The next time that we need to present that to Ofsted is in November at our annual engagement event with Ofsted. So all of this is tracked and recorded and is live, if you like, at any point in time in relation to this cohort of children. The self-evaluation, when it's updated, is sent to our portfolio holder, and we have sessions with Councillor Houghton in relation to any kind of areas of concern or challenge or development or high performance. The other key area in this performance report is the area around children looked after and the numbers of those children. And obviously we had that huge increase during 2021-22 around COVID. There were lots of reports written and analysis done, and we really understood what that increase was about, and we got into the detail of that. A great deal of work then was undertaken through sort of 4 targeted areas around children 0 to 5, unaccompanied asylum seeking children, children from large sibling groups, and children being able to exit care in a timely way following drift and delay. And we've really started again to see the shift in that. So the purpose of our work is not to keep children in care and just keep them looked after. It's to make sure that they are in a stable home, supported, and that we can exit them out of care into a plan for permanence at the earliest opportunity. So what you've seen is that we've really seen a change in children starting to come into care, come down, and the children going out of care increasing. And I'm really hoping that this year we're going to see those lines cross. That's the target, that's the aim. But we have certainly the last 2 years really had more children going out of care than are coming in. So we are seeing the numbers come down. We peaked at just short of 760. This morning we're at 701, and in the last 4 weeks we've taken 16 unaccompanied asylum seeking children. So our children, if you like, as in Shropshire children, we are at the lowest that we've been for quite some time. It is worth saying here though that the vast majority of children in Shropshire are cared for in family settings, and that's a really important aspect because children thrive when they're in a family setting. And by family settings, we mean either their own setting, their own family, and they're placed with parents. We have a few of those where we're still working with the parents to reduce the harm, but it's going in the right direction. Or they're placed with their own birth family, extended birth family, kinship, or connected carers, where those carers are either assessed foster carers or they are on what we call a special guardianship order. Or they're placed with foster carers, or they're placed with adopters. And we move between sort of 75 and 80% of our looked after children being within those family settings. And we always strive to get children to that position where they can be in a family setting. So even if they're in a residential children's home, very few of them are there as their plan for permanence. Where we do have children that are in residential settings for a plan for their permanence, they're primarily our sort of very complicated, complex, high-need disabled children, where they actually it would be to their detriment to live in a family setting, and they need the structure of a residential setting. It is quite detailed, and I think that it's probably better that I try and take questions rather than just continue to kind of go through it. There is the detail there around our court proceedings and our pre-court work, which is known as the public law outline, that sort of shows that is where our areas of complexity is at the moment. We have more complex casework in court than I've ever seen, really, and it's continued to build over the last 5 years. The range of complexities that we're dealing with in terms of parental issues, harm, international issues, complexities of family makeup, multiple fathers within families, etc. It really is that complex. So whilst our numbers aren't necessarily increasing, each individual family's complexity is adding to workload. So when we look at caseloads, we've really managed to stabilise those in most areas of the service, and they're within what we call sort of okay levels to tolerable high levels. But actually, when you unpick those and you unpick the complexity, we're really, sort of seeing that that's where the challenge is for our social work teams at the moment. I really think that maybe if I pause there and take questions as you have them.
So thank you ever so much for our very detailed report. I think as your inspection sort of highlights, the quality of data, so you know exactly where you are. I think this comes through. I think you've also got a very sort of positive outlook for the children in Shropshire. I think keeping referral rates down, keeping section 47s lower, more children coming out of care than going into care. I think it's all very sort of admirable. So thank you very much for the work your team is all doing there. We'll now move on to questions from Mr. Horton.
Thank you, Chair. Ruth Houghton, portfolio holder for social care. I'm becoming much more familiar with children's services, having had the inspection and obviously reported on it a few times. And I'd really like to thank Sonia and the team for another really good report. I don't want to say very much, except that the team work exceptionally hard. Having been to visit some of the services, they're very professional, very qualified, and very committed to the children they're supporting, and that should be noted by this committee. But I really want to say, though, is that this week is National Adoption Week. There are tools on the, you'll have seen, I hope, press releases, and there are tools around promoting National Adoption Week and fostering on the members' gateway, and it'll be really helpful for members to view those and to share that, use those tools to share the need for new foster carers and specifically new adopters, particularly this week. Thank you
for sharing that information. Any questions, please?
A quick question in regards of complexity. So you mentioned a lot of complexity, obviously with legal side and complexity, obviously working with children, same things. Is there something that you've spotted that, say, a couple of years ago was practically non-existent, but is now far more commonplace that you think we should be aware of? Not just in relation to obviously children's services, but something that you think is basically appeared out of nowhere that we need to actually go and investigate further, because this could potentially be the tip of the iceberg of something later on down the line.
No, I wouldn't say there's anything that's sort of coming out of nowhere. I think that there are a couple of areas that are challenging for Shropshire. So we have an interesting demographic within our family makeup, in that our percentage of children that live in families of 4 children and more is much higher than the national average. And so one of the things that it can contribute to complexity in court proceedings is when you have 6, 7, 8 and 9 children, and that's not been unusual in the last couple of years, being removed from families. And within that, sometimes they're the same birth parents, but sometimes they might be the same mother and 3 fathers, for example, or 2 fathers and 2 mothers, etc. So that large sibling group issue around our demographic. Obviously, over the last few years, we have seen a real increase in child exploitation moving into Shropshire, and we're actually managing that really well through the Trees team, but it does have a sort of like impact on the kind of levels of risk that we kind of like manage. I think one of the areas where we do face challenges is parents able to access early intervention when they have their own issues. So if they are in need of some kind of mental health support at an early stage, drug and alcohol support at an early stage, and domestic abuse, and particularly if they are experiencing all 3 of those at any one time, we don't have dedicated services at this point in time in Shropshire that really kind of like works with those parents. So what we end up with in the court setting is parents undergoing separate assessments and then challenges in them accessing services. So what we are seeing as outcomes for children is more care orders being made with what is called a roadmap as to how could you get back home to how could we get them back home in say 2 or 3 years, which is a great outcome for the children if the parents do the work, but it's not a great outcome if you can't get them the services and they can't do the work, because it does leave those children sort of hanging in limbo for a period of time, if you like. So that's a kind of like area of complexity. It's not come out of nowhere, but I think more children are in that space where their parents have got more challenges, more issues, and the need for a more joined up kind of intervention. And I think that's the purpose of the Families First programme, is to really try and enable those services to start working together differently at an earlier opportunity.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Regarding foster parents, do our foster parents come direct to us, or are they via agency, which I've heard of?
Combination of both.
Do you have the percentage breakdown of the 2?
Not off the top of my head. I think we've just had a real drop in our independent foster agency numbers. I don't have the percentage breakdown off the top of my head. I can get it for you. We do track it. So we have our own fostering assessment and support team, and we've just undergone a transformation around that, and we've really increased the number of foster carers that we've managed to recruit in the last sort of 2 years. There's a national shortage of foster carers, and it's a real missed opportunity, I think, for us to be able to really support children in the best possible way. So we have a very successful, we are, effectively a registered fostering agency ourselves. We do use independent fostering agencies. There are a number that are based in Shropshire, and we have, good quality working relationships with them because we need them in order to make sure children are in independent fostering agency, in foster care, whichever route that kind of comes through. And one of the things that influences that is, yes, availability when the child first comes in, but B, then matching, because it's so important if a child's going to spend a longer time in care rather than a short period of time, that they are really effectively matched with that family. And so we tend to match around need, not whether or not it's a mainstream foster carer or an agency foster carer.
Are efforts being made to bring those agency foster carers in-house?
Tricky one. We're not allowed to actively approach. However, we do talk to carers around our offer, and if they've got our children and they've got them permanently, we do have those kind of conversations, but we're not allowed to actively say, will you come and work for us?
Because I'm led to believe in other councils that this is largely due to cost, that they get paid more and they get an additional or different level of support that seems to suit their needs better. So I'm just wondering what we can do around those areas.
We've worked very hard to improve our level of support. The cost is a debatable one, so it's very difficult to actually get from a private company what they actually pay the foster carers. So a couple of years ago, we recalibrated our fees and allowances payments, and we know that we're quite high up. We're well within the sort of national kind of recommended levels. We matched Health and Wrekin, for example, who obviously are our most close competitor for local foster carers. Quite often we're paying a higher fee to the agency, not to the foster carer. So when we do have foster carers come across, they often say we're paying the same, if not a little bit more than what they were actually getting. It is about, for most foster carers, it's not about the money. Most foster carers, it is about the support and the development offer and the sort of like ability for them to get the right help and support. So, for example, we've got Mockingbird, which is a very experienced foster family who then support a cluster of 8 carers. They provide short breaks, they provide babysitting, childminding, emotional support to the foster carers, etc. And we're looking to expand the Mockingbird model and offer. Stepping Stones works very closely, and we've just expanded Stepping Stones' remit to work closely with foster carers to provide that support when children are first go to live with them, so that we can try and prevent any kind of challenges becoming breakdown challenges in 6, 9, 12 months time, etc. When children are kind of settling. When children settle, that's when you see their trauma come out, and actually it's a sign that they are really quite settled and they're attaching to foster carers. But that's then the hardest period for foster carers, because that can be really challenging to live through if you're living with 2 or 3 children who are displaying trauma-related behaviours, sort of 7 days a week. So the purpose of Stepping Stones is to really try and support those carers therapeutically through that period of time, so we can get through that period with the children and they can continue to thrive in those families.
Thank you very much indeed for all your time and a very comprehensive answer as well. Are there any further questions? One question.
Yeah, sorry, just one brief question. I believe we're looking after 32 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children at the moment, and that they are funded through a government scheme. So my question is just around that funding and whether it, does it cover the costs of their care? Does it take into account the broader strain on services, for example, and potentially, having to support them till 25 and beyond? So that's my question.
Yeah. So obviously we are part of the National Transfer Scheme. It's a mandatory government scheme where we take our fair proportion of children from who arrive in the country unaccompanied. It's 0.1% of our total child population is our fair proportion. I think that works out at us as about 70 children, and at the moment under 18 we've got about 35. Hence we are currently in a position of we are taking some more at the moment. I wish there was a straightforward answer to your question around funding. So the funding that we get per child under 18 is a per week funding, and it just about covers the accommodation costs and the kind of living costs. Once they get to 18, and then they are in that more difficult space where they're often awaiting their leave to remain decision, because that isn't made prior to them being 18, and that can take up to 2 years for them. The grant that we get per child or per young person is not enough to cover the costs. At the moment, there is a scheme that if we are able to take our fair share, it's not a great phrase, but you know what I mean, in a timely way. So we do it on a rota, so you're not constantly taking children. You have a place on a rota, and so you know that for that next sort of week, 2 weeks, if there are children that need to be taken, you'll be approached first. If you can take those within 48 hours, you get an extra £10,000 per child. So we work very hard to have those accommodation ready and the support systems in place so that we are able to do that. And this year we've generated £180,000 worth of income. Now that balances off some of those costs of the over 18s, and particularly at the moment we've got more over 18s at the lower part of the grant than at the higher part of the grant. So as an overall offer, it probably at the end of the financial year we'll know, because our finance colleagues work on it for us at the end of the financial year, breaks probably about even. It does pay for an education offer for those that aren't able to access a school or a college course at the moment, and we're seeking for it to pay for a health professional, a dedicated health professional, because there are some complexities around the complexities of those children's health that we need the sort of specialist support in. But at the end of the financial year, each year we know whether it just about does or comes under. What it doesn't cover, of course, is social work time, travel, PA support, IRO support, etc. And that isn't included within that kind of grant funding.
Yeah, thank you.
One question.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Sonia, for the explanation, because it's really quite complex. I would like to say that this is a national transfer scheme. We're mandated to take part in it, and we do. And there have been some really very good outcomes for those young people. And it might be something that the Scrutiny Committee would wish to consider at a later date, and to hear from those young people themselves as to what they've achieved.
Just love your recommendation. Thank you all very much for your very concise reports this morning. We did start by saying that the recommendation was to consider areas of focus for our future work plans. I think during adult and social care, something to do along with the self-funding aspect of it seemed to be quite an issue there. Education, report on the Euro Academy liaison programmes, I think report you to consider sharing. We'll invite Joe Kelly along to the next scrutiny meeting, the virtual school. I think that'll be very interesting. Regarding some of the fostering, perhaps numbers, which is a report on private fosterers and local authority fosterers, but on whose might be quite interesting just to sort of round that area. Are there any further items anyone would like to be considered for the workflow before we've heard this morning, please?
Could I just, in line with what Tanya was saying, suggest that maybe we look at the self-funding market as a joint HOSC and POSC. I'm the vice chair on the HOSC, and I thought that I can see an awful lot of overlaps there in what we were talking about at the beginning of the week.
We could liaise over that. Perfect. Thank you very much. Any other items anyone would like to be considered? Marcus, thank you ever so much for your time and reports.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just quickly introduce this item. So last year in June, Shropshire Council had our first Care Quality Commission inspection. They come in to inspect how the local authority delivered our Care Act duty. Dan and Natalie will step through the report. Obviously, we're kind of 18 months on now since that inspection. Attached in your papers is the full CQC report, as well as what we're calling towards outstanding action plan. It's really important that this council continues to be on an improvement trajectory in terms of how we deliver our Care Act duties. And this report talks to that. So I'm going to refer now straight to Dan, who will step us through the report. And like before, we'll do a quick summary, but let's have an opportunity to have that kind of debate and conversation and about where committee would like to go next in terms of adult social care. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Daniel Powner. I'm the service manager for in-house provision. I'm also the nominated individual for the CQC regulated services for the local authority. So the purpose of the report, which hopefully you've had a chance to read, was to update the committee really on the Care Quality Commission's assessment of adult social care. As this was the first update, the report outlines the assessment process as well as the findings and progress. The report also aims to provide assurance to the committee that improvements are incorporated into our business as usual, enhancing our monitoring and performance and progress. So the assessment framework itself, so the CQC assessment framework, as Tanya's just said, was introduced back in 2023 to provide statutory assurance for the delivery of adult social care. There are 5 main evidence categories used to assess local authorities, including people's experience, feedback from staff and leaders, feedback from partners, processes and outcomes. So the evidence that is collected in different stages that include existing evidence from national data, regulatory insights, requested evidence, which is policies, strategies and surveys, and then actively collected evidence from case tracking and focus groups. So for Shropshire's assessment, they would focus on working with people, so how effectively the local authority engages with individuals who draw on care and support, providing support to the quality, accessibility and timeliness of care and support services, ensuring safety within the system, so safeguarding arrangements, risk management and measures to maintain safety and well-being, and then leadership and governance, so strategic direction, workforce capability and organisational culture to drive continuous improvement. So the outcome of that assessment was that we were rated good, which is excellent. That was first published back in February 2025. Some of the strengths that were highlighted from within that assessment were, although this isn't an exhaustive list, were a commitment to adult social care duties, detailed in the Care Act, engagement with unpaid carers, positive user experience at first contact, no waiting times for safeguarding and hospital discharge, innovation for rural delivery, such as virtual care and 2 carers in a car, active co-production feedback mechanisms. Some of the improvements that were suggested were around streamlining processes and delays in assessments, support for carers, transitions, deprivation of liberty safeguard delays, learning from complaints. Some of the next steps were to focus on continuous improvement, which we're now calling towards outstanding action plan, complete annual self-assessments and quarterly progress reports, learning from other councils like Camden and Blackpool, launch of our co-production framework and remuneration plan, strengthening our performance and monitoring governance. So the towards outstanding action plan is to focus our continuous improvement that we've created, and we're calling a TOAP. So you might hear somebody mention a TOAP. Some of the priorities there include the front door and assessment times, streamlining demand management, reablement expansion, so to promote people's independence, carer support, so improving pathways and a replacement care offer, market quality assurance, so dashboards and leadership oversight, safeguarding exploitation, so new guidance, training and awareness, and co-production, the volunteer pool and digital engagement. So summary of progress so far really has been focused on reducing waiting times, strengthening governance and improving accessibility. There is evidence, robust evidence of ongoing transformation with regular monitoring, risk management and a commitment to continuous improvement. Some challenges do remain, particularly around resource constraints in areas requiring improvement, but the action plan is being actively managed and reviewed regularly. So next steps and governance. So we've established our continuous improvement group, which is chaired by the DAS. We will produce quarterly highlight reports and track outcomes. We'll refresh our annual self-assessment, and we're preparing for reassessment as we speak, which we're expecting to be either late 2026 or early 2027. Overall summary, was that we were rated good. We've got continuous improvement monitored through the TOA, or the Towards Outstanding Action Plan. We've got clear governance and accountability in place, and we're focused on carers, timeliness and co-production. And we aim to move from good to outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. Any questions, please?
Duncan Kerr from Oxley South. Just the action plan at Appendix 2, in the end column, we've got quite a few which just talks about in progress or planning stage. It would be a bit helpful to us if we could have some dates, which are available somewhere else, and reporting to us so we get a sense of how long in progress will take.
Yeah, so that's just an extract really of the Towards Outstanding Action Plan. It's a very, very large document that I've tried to sort of give you a brief overview of the milestones and actions, but it's contained on a very, very large spreadsheet. But yeah, so in terms of the progress and completion dates, yeah, next time we can bring an update, hopefully they'll include them.
Yeah, I get it's only a summary, but even as a summary, it'd be nice for the people over the Scrutiny Committee to have an understanding. This is going to take 2 years, or it's going to take 2 weeks. We don't know from planning stage or in progress. It's hard to judge.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
That's good. Any further questions, anyone? No. Well, thank you very much, and congratulations on that report. I think if it had been more sort of negative, we've had more to say here this morning regarding it, but you've clearly identified, what your strengths are. You've identified your areas for development. You've clearly got the plans, perhaps not with all the dates, for the way forward, which I think would be quite useful. So thank you for your time. Thank you. We'll now move on to our local use transformation pilot, which was shared with me a few weeks ago. It seems really exciting, so I'm really looking forward to this item now.
Thank you very much, Chair. So people, if you just wouldn't mind putting the slides on the screen. Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. I'm just going to introduce Helena Williams, who's our Youth Support Manager. Helena's here this morning just to step through some of the more detailed aspects of this really, really exciting opportunity for Shropshire. We've included in the agenda and the papers several aspects of information that we thought were really, really useful, including the slides, particularly the original report that was completed as part of the peer review. So winding back a little bit, this was a real opportunity. Only 12 authorities nationally were selected in terms of the bid. We felt really strongly, both from an administrative perspective with the new administration coming into office, and from an office perspective, that this was too good an opportunity not to progress. And whilst there was a tremendous amount of activity leading up to the end of term, it's fair to say in June and July, this was something we had to do. So working through all of that opportunity, it involves several members of the National Youth Agency and other colleagues doing a peer review in Shropshire in July, visiting direct work, services, youth teams, speaking directly to children and young people. And that is all brought together in the report that you've had included in the papers. Following that work and lots of engagement with Helena and the team in terms of developing this, there was a report and a draft action plan that was developed in consultation with those colleagues and members as well. You've had that in the pack. So in terms of today, we've got a small selection of slides just to step through with you this morning, because we want to engage you in this process. It's really important that you as elected members are both driving and advocating for this work across your areas. The opportunity for town and parish councils to be involved in this is absolutely fundamental in terms of how this succeeds or will fall moving forward. So again, we're really keen to bring you into this space. So I think in terms of next steps, if we just step through the slides, Helena, and then we'll probably do a bit of a double act in terms of this. And then
my eyesight's terrible. I have to look at.
So we'll work our way through this, but I think it's important really that you have the opportunity just to step through this, because the background information is fundamental. So for some colleagues, they say, well, isn't youth services, youth work just a nice to have? Well, actually, there is a really clear statutory duty that the council has to fulfil. And it's fair to say we've been limited or lacking in that, Helena, actually. So I think we need to acknowledge that first and foremost. You'll see on there the shift that previous challenges within the council have led to where we've been with this. So 98% reduction in youth service funding since 2010. And it's not just left it fragmented, but the actual spend per head of young person is in the lowest in the country. Some real massive challenges. And we'll come on to some of what that then brings and what that means for working from that point. But this is an opportunity to rebuild, reset, and move forward with the statutory youth officer, the youth offer in Shropshire, and the role of the council, Shropshire Council, versus the role of town and parish councils in this space. So I'll hand to Yolanda just to kind of step through the next slide in terms of what the transformation pilot is going to bring us.
Right, I'm going to be squinting here. So local youth transformation pilot has drawn down £621,000. Like David said, they were one of 12 local authorities out of 48 across the country that was selected to apply. It's enabled us to it's been a really good 4 months just preparing for this a little bit, because it's enabled us to really kind of just go under the skin a little bit and just look at kind of what some of the structural issues were. And actually that's kind of come out and been reinforced within the youth service report. So our work streams and our ambitions going forward are kind of developed from the recommendations that came from the youth service report. So I think there was about 48 recommendations, and we have addressed them throughout our work streams. The first one, which is the really important one, and it's kind of nothing will work without this one. It's the culture change. It's understanding what our statutory duty is. I mean, some people will be aware in 2011 we lost a lot of youth service. Well, we lost our youth service in Shropshire, but we also lost the infrastructure that went with that. But also we lost the knowledge of that statutory duty. So it's been diluted, and it's been interpreted in terms of just about delivering youth clubs, and it's not around delivering youth clubs at all. It's around system leadership. It's around how the system connects together. It's around that youth ecosystem. And so we felt this was really important piece of work to do. The culture change, I'll spend more time on that because it's really, really important. And the LGA are really keen to come and work with us around this. I spoke to them yesterday. It's really interesting because they actually wanted to pay for their time, even though the funding's there. So they really, really value actually us doing that. So the second one is the youth governance work stream. That's building participation back into the system. Here, by right, is a national framework of youth participation, and we'll be accelerating that process to get a really good self-assessment of youth voice across the council, and that will enable us to put an action plan in place to make sure that actually we have young people involved in every element of this project, from local youth partnerships into our kind of more strategic partnership, and somewhere into decision making as well. That would be amazing. The third one is local youth partnerships. That's the way forward. We know that we can't deliver youth services alone. There's some great partners already out there delivering it. So local youth partnerships will bring kind of a lot of those town and parish councils really collectively together to share resource, share funding, draw down funding, and deliver directly into their communities as well. And then we've got infrastructure support. Currently we have our infrastructure support there's a lot of history there. It was a charity that was set up by Shropshire Council 40 years ago. However, it's not fit for purpose, and that's been very clear in our youth service report by the MYA. And that's mainly because they are now a delivery partner as well as infrastructure. So there's a bit of blurred lines and conflict of interest, but we've already had those conversations with our partners, and we want them to work with us to kind of develop an infrastructure that's kind of fit for purpose for today. And then we've got workforce development. The workforce is very depleted in youth work, massively. I think I can count on one hand how many professional youth workers there are in the county now. And we need to look at actually how we can kind of develop that workforce. And there's quite a significant amount of funding to be able to do that. Youth work in schools is about reimagining our targeted youth support offer. And the final bit is kind of the project management and the kind of evaluation that goes around that.
Thank you very much. So if you just dip onto the next slide. So this is what young people have told us directly in terms of what they want. And part of the rationale for bringing this to scrutiny, both Councillor Houghton, Councillor Hall and Councillor Barger in terms of as the portfolio holder for this particular area. We're absolutely keen that this is shared with Scrutiny to enable you to see directly and hear directly what young people are saying. I think we're all keen to go a step further than that, and as part of this development work, we'd like to see the formation of a youth assembly or youth parliament. Again, that can be influenced. We talked a little bit about that in one of our last meetings. Rather than us imposing that, I think let's engage young people to develop that with you rather than just with us. So actually, let's move in that direction. So we've got some additional funding from the grant to be able to do that work, get that up and running, make that a reality. So by this time next year, we would like to set that expectation that we've got that in place, and that can start to form part of those, as Lena said, those decision-making, scrutiny, possibly even cabinet and council type of conversations. So again, that's to work through together, a real opportunity. And some of the barriers there are cross-cutting. No individual service or team in the council can resolve this. So this is why it's so important at cross-council level and cross-area level, whether that's a town, parish, or the whole of Shropshire. We know we've got, as Lena said, a number of good examples where town parishes are funding this work directly. So we've just identified some of those examples in the slides. So I think there's an opportunity for you as members, for young people, to share what that looks and feels like actually, and then in informing decisions moving forward, actually shaping that work as we develop that. And that again is part of that formation of the panels across Shropshire and feeding that back into Scrutiny really. So I think this is all around the infrastructure, Helena, isn't it, in terms of bringing this back to our fundamental, the statutory duties, the coordination element of what we do, the system leadership, enabling consistency so that we don't have one part of the county being really well served, equally another part of the county being really underserved, and actually we try and bridge those gaps to make that more consistent. And then equally, cabinet, council, Scrutiny are hearing directly those voices of young people, because we've got lots of good examples through education settings, schools where they've got councils already working. How do we feed all those in to this as we develop it? So I think the role of this group, I think particularly, is around, next slide please, Sophie, the partnerships and sustainability. One, being mindful that this isn't just an ask around money. We've got some resources this year to develop the work, get things set up, to seed from different ideas, but there will be a sustainable piece in terms of this, working with not just the Shropshire Council, but the town and parish councils around how we make this sustainable in the future. And that co-investment piece, I think that's fair to say, is we can't do it one. That's it. You can't do one without the other. Really, it's fundamental. And all of those things joined together. When we talk about quality of practice, we can't just mean the quality of social work practice. We need to mean the quality of practice generally, whether that's an early help practitioner, an education psychologist, an education quality and safeguarding officer, a youth worker. We need to be consistent around that quality of practice, and that's the only way we can see that safety net that we talk about around early intervention prevention and avoiding escalation of costs. Fundamental through this is all the safeguarding work that we see. Those trusted adults, and I had the absolute privilege of spending an evening on Friday at the West Midlands Excellence Awards with 3 youth workers from Lena's team, and it was an absolute privilege. And they talked to me about the direct work that they were doing on a day-to-day basis, working with some really challenged young people in really quite vulnerable situations, and they are providing that safety net, that security for them, so that they're avoiding, they're insulated from the need to come into statutory social care or intervention, or even if they're on the cusp of that, actually providing that safety net for them to share some of their concerns and work through that. So really good opportunity to build on that. And all of this, it's fair to say, is wrapped up in a really strong evaluation through external partners, Serena, isn't it?
Yeah, RSM, yeah.
So really good opportunities there. So budget planning and forward thinking. I think this is the key thing for us now in terms of how do Scrutiny members think we can take this, myself and I think most importantly our elected members, take this into cabinet and council in those conversations. So we haven't got all the answers here, so we're genuinely asking for your thoughts in terms of what's best in your areas, working with those colleagues. How do we engage in that conversation around the purpose of this, developing the conversations around precepts, what that might look like? That's going to look different in different parts of Shropshire, and it should do. It's how we start to support those conversations. So part of this is around raising awareness, hopefully getting you on board, and then actually you can support those conversations moving forward really with this. It's fair to say, Elena, that within the grant, there's only a very small percentage, about 6%, I think it is from memory, that can be used for direct work.
Yeah, this is about building the kind of capacity back within the local authority team with partners. It's not around direct delivery of youth work, because that would not be sustainable, just giving us 600,000 for direct delivery. So this is about kind of putting those structures in place so actually we can enable the youth sector to thrive and our young people.
And it's fair to say, when the National Youth Association came in and did their peer review, young people themselves said, what we really don't want you to do is put something on now that'll be gone in 4 months or 6 months. And so we need to be really clear and hear that directly from the young people. So we're absolutely not going to do that. So that's really important. So I think the key question which we'll come to is around how do we make that work sustainable? How do we keep you informed and cited on this as it develops? And it will continue to develop. We've shared the draft action plan, but I think it is that how do we engage through the precept conversations, perhaps an indicative amount or other ideas that develops in this way. Well, do you want to just say a little bit around the wider system impact?
Yeah.
Next slide then, Sophie, thank you.
I think David touched on a little bit before. A lot of people seeing youth services kind of as nice to have, but actually they do have a much wider system impact in terms of prevention and early help. You know, youth services, by creating safe spaces, trusted adults, keep things in that prevention space. So that reduces kind of the demand on high level services. It also acts as a buffer really in terms of schools. Schools kind of, I suppose, don't have that community buffer anymore. So they are kind of dealing with things that are going on in the community as well as things that are going on at school. You know, that puts additional challenges on schools as well. Supports young peoples with their attendance and engagement in terms of improved resilience. Improves health and well-being, and that's one of the big ones. This is the statutory duty for the improvement of young people's well-being. That's what the statutory duty is. You know, youth work and those spaces tackle rural isolation, and we know by promoting good activity improves mental health as well, and also the wider system in terms of community safety, reducing ASB and exploitation again by providing safe spaces within the community. So that statutory duty runs through the system, it runs through education, it runs through prevention, it runs through health, and it runs through safeguarding. It's the anchor really that kind of brings it together.
The golden thread.
Like the golden thread, yeah.
Thanks, Sophie. So I think that the next slide, colleagues, just sets out some simple asks or questions around of scrutiny, really, to endorse the direction of travel. Pick up any questions. We're very happy to receive feedback. That's part of the work that we wanted to do. This is all leading to the co-production, co-design of the youth strategy. So rather than us imparting that, actually let's really engage widely with young people, with yourselves around the design and development of that. We can align that with the national strategy as well, but again, it's making sure that this is fit for purpose for Shropshire. And you will have seen in the slides just the next steps in terms of what comes through, some of the timelines around that. We're really interested in feedback from members.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's a QR code and some example ways that we can that you can share directly with us that will feed directly into the transformation project that we can pick it up. So that's really hopefully quite useful for you, but we want to hear your thoughts, your feedback. And as I said, we've shared with you the draft action plan as it stands currently.
Yeah.
And we'll commit if members are interested in this regular updates around where we are with this, whether that's in the meeting or whether that's just a written form to say we've had this point, this is where we are now, and we can share that update to make sure that time is used efficiently. So I think from our perspective, it's just to take feedback on that and ask the committee to endorse where we're moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much both for that very comprehensive and quite an exciting programme. We'll come to questions first. That's Susan.
Putting my partnership plan task and finish chair head on. We've got the SALC AGM coming up. Why don't you come along and see if you can get a position in there, a slot in there you'll have the vast majority of them all sort of sat in front of you and we can start the discussion and then we can all take it back individually and talk to our people.
Perfect, yeah. The town and parish council report's going out by SALC today as well, the insight report. So, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think it's very important to making parish councils understand exactly what this is. So they're not a solution. They know what, the first thing they say, financial implications. How much is this going to cost us? You know, on with the precept going up and everything else, how are we going to actually fundamentally manage this? Thank you.
Where is the money coming from? Is this just funding from change from back up all works all the intent of the time being?
Well, Councillor, that's the exam question, isn't it? So I think part of this is actually engaging town and parish councils directly to say, what do you want this to look like in your area? Because part of this is, and let's be honest, town and parish councils are going to have to set an amount that is suitable for them, or work in partnership with different areas. So I think appreciate the opportunity that Councillor Hughesman has offered there, because we are going to need to practically step through some of those things, and we're not going to be able to say this is going to cost equally 10,000 or 15,000 or 2,000. They're the kind of conversations we're going to need to get into. So we can certainly share examples of areas. You've given one already in terms of this, but I think there are lots of other areas, and we've included some in the slides that do that. I think that's the question. What do areas want this to look like in their area? Because this is about the council, Shropshire Council, saying we want to coordinate this to there's opportunity, but actually we can't fund all of this. Let's be realistic. What we can do is ask those individual areas to say, what do you want for your youth of today, and moving that forward? What are the challenges and gaps? And what we want to try and do is engage them in that conversation. And that's going to be challenging, let's be honest with this. And we're not expecting that by April it's going to look perfect, but it's going to be a journey in this way. Part of this work is to say we can offer some aspects around coordination, we can learn from good practice here and locally and nationally. But it is those conversations we're going to need to work through. And I think the more we can engage young people in that. So there's some great examples, Market Drayton being one where you've engaged directly with young people, Whitchurch being another one, and Shrewsbury you've mentioned. We do have some really cracking examples of those areas putting their hands in their pocket locally to make that work. And I know that's a real challenge given where everyone is, and there'll be competing priorities, but part of it is that conversation to look at what that develops moving forward.
Yeah, I think that
Indeed. Indeed.
Parish councils say we've got no money to fund this at all. We have got quite some people in the central establishment that pay. We've also got a few other direct services. What do you think the response is going to be? I'm looking at the map and the 6 different areas. Some of those have got umpteen parish councils.
Yes.
Hardly raising any funds for the street lights that they've got around the local level or whatever. So just practical implications of this need to be started very quickly. That ought to be the top. Perhaps the only one to start with. That you look at is what are your expectations for how much it's going to cost, or how much you're going to get from the parish town council. If many of them are already not agreeing to the memorandum of understanding at the start of this process.
Mm-hmm.
So this might be pie in the sky unless there's some work done initially. So no, not just you, but the highways and streets need to know where it all stands with the town and parish council, who you hope, because their precept at potentially to be more than helpful in this regard, but they haven't got the resources. There's not the capacity, either financial or in terms of human resources within those Devon Parish Council to manage this without huge other costs involved.
I think some hands went to in terms of possibly responding. So I think it's really good questions there in terms of that. They are exactly the practicalities we're going to need to work through. So I think there isn't an easy, simple answer to this, and it's going to be different, isn't it, depending on which areas you're looking at. I think, let's be realistic, this is going to grow. So actually part of the conversation is what can we do? It's also what through those town and parish councils and other partners, what can we lever in? So part of the work that we can do this year is actually look at identifying the different pots that are out there that the council, as in Shropshire Council, may not be able to access, but other partners may well be able to. And there will be limitations on those. So we're not certainly saying this is a euphoria and it's going to be perfect, but actually we've got to set a direction of travel. We've got to set our stall out around what we want to achieve in terms of the vision, use the resource that we've got wisely and clearly. In the background, there may also be some directions of travel in terms of national work with this. That may or may not come with funding. We're not at the minute planning on that coming with any funding. So it's about what can we do in terms of this moving forward. The core costs that we talked about in terms of the central team, as in Helena's team, they're not to be picked up by the town and parish councils. That will remain as part of the work that Shropshire Council do. So again, I think you're right, it's a good challenge. We can make clearer the determination of those lines, who's paying for what and how that starts to work through. So yeah, we appreciate that feedback.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Thanks, Chair. I'm a Church Stretton Town Councillor as well, and I've been on there for 16 years. And a week last Monday, we had a strategy meeting. All the councillors come in, and we were looking at ways of making money to raise for services that are going to come down to town and parish councils. But Church Stretton Town Council has been a bit more proactive on the youth side. We put in a sum of money to the youth service. We've run 2 youth clubs for 2 age groups. When I was involved with Mayfair about 10 years ago, we always found that the elder, more secondary age children never come to youth clubs. Or if they did, they'd show their face and disappear. Where we found that again now in Church Stretton. The younger ones really well attended. We're lucky if we get 1 or 2 to the older ones, so it's been stopped. But it was something we discussed of perhaps having a youth hub, because they go into school and they're under discipline, they're told what to do, where they don't want that in their free time. So we suggested something like a youth hub where they can go, you have one person, that person is safeguarded, looks over them, but is the control, whether you could get away with one person, it's a thing we're looking at. The other thing, when I was on district early 2000s, we used to invite schools in from mock council so we could get the schools. And I've been banging on a town council for the 16 years I've been on it to do the same. And we've now set up a youth council. We're in the process of about to invite that age group of children. We're sort of looking 13 to about 18, because like when I was that age, I hadn't got a clue what council did. Where if you can get that age group of people, but all this will come under the youth thing, and we are doing it in Church Stretton. But it's like Councillor Mosley said, that there's a lot more things that's going to come, more pressing. But we're already started, and I think we need to, because I've just thought, as he was saying about the areas, we've got parish councils quite close to us with children in there. And it's something I'm going to take back now to our town council and say, we need to be discussing it with those parish councils to get them involved. But no, thanks. And these, I've read these, excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Food for thought there, I think. Absolutely, very good points. Councillor Hall first. Dr. Hughes.
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate the team for securing this funding, which I think is really, really important. I think people have forgotten the value of youth work, and as a youth professional myself, I can tell you that the conversations that youth workers have with young people make a big difference, and it's the difference between making the right decision or the wrong decision, and the wrong decision can cost society dearly, as we all know. Youth clubs, yes, youth clubs are there for a certain amount of young people. We're very fortunate here in Shrewsbury, for example, we retained our youth clubs, mainly parts of the hard work of Councillor Mosley, who kept them going after we lost all our youth services in Shropshire. I remember when we were all called into Shire Hall.
It's room, Andy, actually.
We were all sacked on the spot. And of course, that was a dark day. This shines a bit of a light on things. One of the things that we have lost due to that loss of youth work is youth professionals. The sector is very short of people qualified in the area to be working with our young people across Shropshire. What this money does provide is a training element that I understand that we can actually get some between us, even if it's between ourselves and different agencies, some youth professionals trained up to be working in this sector. And they may not be working directly for youth councils, but they could be, but they could be working for other voluntary sectors as well. But those people need to be out there, and we need to train them and retain them, which Absolutely. I think is probably the most important thing. And you mentioned about the youth councils down there in Church Stretton. I remember visiting Church Stretton Town Council to talk about setting one up after we set ours up in Shrewsbury here. And again, it's about that young person's voice. And also you made a good point about hubs as well. Not every young people are in a youth club. It works to a certain age because they're willing to participate in activities provided, but the older ones, they don't. So it's about having that safe place and space for those young people to find a youth worker and share their experiences and put them in the right direction.
Absolutely.
So I'm hoping that this will help develop that aspect of youth work in Shropshire.
It's the start of a long journey, this is, so, let's be realistic, it's, this is giving us, putting the foundations back in at the council that we need to support the whole system, and going back to another point before, there's lots of opportunities and creative ways to draw down funding. Joint commissioning is one way, looking at police and crime commissioner money, looking at public health, don't know if they've got any money, but, looking at actually bringing, because this is prevention at its core, really, youth work is, that's what it is. It is community-based kind of youth work. So actually, what can we do in terms of actually being a bit more creative with how we draw down the money and then filter that down into services? Because at the moment, it's kind of left to parish councils and Shropshire Council, but actually, it's a shared responsibility here a little bit. So do those conversations need to be had kind of wider than that? But also the local, looking at how we develop and kind of form our infrastructure support going forward. I think that's really critical, because at the moment it is very much about supporting those very small village youth clubs, but actually what we need it to do is to kind of support the sector, to look at how it draws down funding from businesses, how it kind of works collaboratively with the MYA and UK Youth and looking at their funding streams to bring stuff, funding down into the local authority areas. So there are lots of opportunities, and that's why infrastructure is such a big part of this programme. But going back to youth clubs, Andy, and teenagers, statutory duty is for 13 to 19-year-olds. That is exactly the same age range that say they don't want to attend a youth club. However, if you ask them what they do want, they will tell you they want safe spaces, they will want safe adults, and they want safe opportunities to grow and develop and new experiences. So what they describe is a youth club. It just needs to be branded different, and it needs to be developed with them and not for them. I think that is the critical bit when you're getting to that adolescent stage, that is responding to their needs. So we need to work with, as opposed to here's something and you go to it.
Thank you. I'm hearing an awful lot of absolutely fabulous ambitions and admirable outcomes, but in line with the recommendations that we put forward recently to Cabinet, we know that we're not going to get an amazing amount of government funding. We know it is completely inadequate, and I must remind officers and the administration, the big recommendation we put out is you are dealing with a volunteer network of people. These people are already quite stretched, And I have considerable concerns following the discussions that, we have already undertaken in our task and finish group. I do not want to have any of this to have a negative impact on local democracy. Because if we get people going, I've had enough, I can't do this anymore, you're just expecting too much from me, and it collapses at that level, then where are we? So it is always bearing in mind, no matter how admirable the ambitions are, it's going to be achieved through these people, and we cannot expect too much of them or we'll lose them. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, youth work is obviously very important for all the reasons that you've said, and it comes under part of our statutory duties. But I think Alan's said, the thing concerning really is that we've got a very large amount of money, but a very small amount that's going to be able to be used in delivery, and that we don't want to set it up to fail. And find that we can't actually keep it going. And I'm afraid over the years I've seen far too many instances of that from the council, and a classic one at the moment is the work that's gone on around highways around the station, which has taken a year of incredible disruption in the town, really affected businesses very negatively. It came out of some good idea somebody had, which wasn't necessarily a request from members, it came from an officer thing. We've now got very wide pavements where nobody actually walks, and it's just an absolute nightmare, and it would cost us even more to stop it. So I think we do need to make sure that we are going to be able to sustain this in the future, and it's not just a scheme that we're bringing together because we've got some money. It's got to be done in a way that we are going to be able, and for the young people as well, raise their expectations, then it all falls apart. So I think we do have to look very carefully at the financial side of it. And as I say, also the town and parish councils, I've got 7 parish councils in my, I think most of them haven't signed the member of understanding because they haven't got the capacity and the people or the expertise to do some of these things. And I think it's being a bit misleading because in fact what we're doing is pushing the financial responsibility onto them because they'll put their precept up. So it makes it look like the councillors are putting council tax up, but actually residents are having to pay more because it's coming through the precept. So it's a way of disguising the money that people are having to pay, which I think really is quite misleading.
If I can just come back on some of those points. I think I definitely take your point around making sure it's sustainable. I think there's quite a difference in terms of the work around the station compared to this. Just to put that on record, I think it's really important that we understand that. We're not expecting by April or even by September next year or everyone to have everything up and running. That's just not realistic. But as colleagues have already shared, there are a number of areas that are doing this really well already, and they will be seeing the benefits, and the young people in their areas will be seeing the benefits. And when we talked earlier in performance around the challenges in terms of movement of young people or retaining young people in Shropshire, we're not seeing young people staying in Shropshire, and we are not seeing schools retaining those. We are seeing roles in schools reducing. Even with the house building that we're seeing, we're not seeing migration into Shropshire. So part of what we need to be mindful of is this is fundamental. Unless we engage with people on a different level than we've done previously, why would they stay? And if we don't have those young people staying, what we will see is increasing pressure on the adult social care space for lots and lots of reasons. What we can do is, and this isn't a silver bullet by any stretch, but this is the start of engaging young people in a different dialogue. And portfolio holders have been really, really clear in terms of our role as enabling council. This is about enabling young people to have a voice, actually. And I'll be really clear. The barriers that we talked about in the slides, they've got some very clear views on all of those, as you will have. We need to unlock that in the right way. It won't be perfect. It's the start of a very long journey, but we've got to start that journey somewhere. And if we don't start that journey, we're never going to get to where we want to get to. So very, very useful. And this is part, for us as officers, this is part of the role of scrutiny. We welcome that challenge in terms of hold your horses, just be realistic. That's absolutely fine. We want to work that through then. And then what we can do is start to try and be clearer, set out what we need to set out to try and engage and help people understand that. So this is why we wanted this conversation. So we value genuinely the feedback in that way, both the positive, the challenging and everything in between.
Thank you. I think a lot of what people are saying, to be quite honest, is completely superfluous. You've absolutely hit the nail on the head there, where in terms of you've only got one try. There's only finance to do it once. It's not going to be perfect, but as people correctly pointed out, attendance is going to be the thing that's really the nail in the coffin. What I will say is, for example, Sheffield had a youth club and that just collapsed because it wasn't attendance. What I'd actually like to do is offer you some support. I used to work in a non-profit centre of Birmingham where we would take a group of children in a classroom and we would just, for basically an afternoon, just do a project which was effectively sit down, what do you want? Here's an idea, run with it. I think because you've only got one shot, you really need to find out what these children want. And I'm not just talking younger ages, I mean for all ages, because the fact that they're not turning up when they're becoming older probably means there's something they dislike when they're younger. And I think that's being moved through. And you're absolutely right. Go and get a youth hub or a youth club, you're just going to lose all of them. If you actually sat down with them and asked, not a youth club, but what do you actually want, and actually heard what they say, it would make such a big difference. Because it was the one thing I learned working with children is if you treat them like an adult, if you talk to them like an adult, some of them within minutes will become more of an adult than some adults on the street. They are absolutely fantastic if you just give them the opportunity and the environment to actually engage and tell them what they want. And as pointed out, when it comes to costs, we don't know what the costs are at the moment because we don't know exactly what they want. And I bet you if you find out exactly what they want, they'll probably turn around and say they want some esports hub, something like that. Well, you're probably going to need less staff to do it. There might be some more upfront cost. But in the long term, that'll actually probably save you money. So unless you get it right first time and properly sit down with a large group of them and find out exactly what they want, there's no point in discussing costs of buildings, things like that. You need to be able to make sure you've got basically the majority of the classroom putting their hands up and saying, yes, if you build this, we will come. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just come in there just very quickly as well. I think one thing in the report which I thought was really admirable is the way you've actually consulted with your young people already. Yeah. And I think you did say quite a lot of service, which I think, and what we actually said is very true with a member, absolutely. And children do want the three main priorities of the surveys you said. They want things to go, places to go, they want things to do, they want ways of getting there as well as a safe place. I think your point's very pertinent. Finding out what those young people want, then it's a way of planning. And if those young people are involved in this from the start, which they appear to be, I think that's building on what could be a very exciting, successful project. But there's lots of you've listened to different views as well. I believe I've got any more input. Just finally.
Thank you, Chair. Very quickly, and from two perspectives. One, from portfolio holder hat on, and that moving towards sort of youth council is really positive and something we should all be embracing, because that is the future of this council and democracy, and we need to really focus on that. So I'm on board with that completely. And from my Bishop's Castle councillor hat on, this is one of those situations when if this meeting had been yesterday, it would have been much better, because they were discussing youth when I went to town council last night, but that's how it goes. So I'm hoping they picked the report up. But the person who presented last night was very clear that young people need a third space between home and school, and somewhere to hang out, do their stuff, somewhere safe, as you said. And in Bishop's Castle, we're now in a difficult position, having secured external grant funding and funding from the Shropshire Council. That funding had run out, and the challenge is now, how do we continue with those youth services? So that's a big thing. But in the discussions, we also discovered that there's lots of stuff going on for the youth. The local church have secured diocese funding about 125,000 for 1 day a week. Going Wild in Bishop's Castle has a large youth offer for young people doing outdoor activities. And then at our leisure centre, we have live music sessions, build a band, sports leadership courses we've run in the past, life-saving courses. So I think the youth offer can be a bit of a pick and mix type thing. And so there's a middle road somewhere through this, and it doesn't all have to be funded for 1 day a week, one night a week from a parish or town council. But it's not easy. It isn't easy. But my biggest concern is in rural areas where a main town, Bishop's Castle, provides precept and the funding, and all the other parishes perhaps don't, although they're getting better. In fact, in fairness, for the youth centre, they contribute a lot of money, for the leisure centre rather. But the other big challenge in rural areas is that school transport. When that school bus goes home, those young people are stuck. That's it, yeah. So there has to be some provision and thought given to that, really.
I think we had a comment from the pupils about transport. I think that was from the rural sort of areas, wasn't it? And I think perhaps the way of rural areas sort of contribute to what's happening in the local town. So there's ways of exploring that with perhaps different parish councils as well. Any further questions? Well, thank you very much for your time. I think we would welcome a report, perhaps at a future meeting, on the progress of where we are. There's still lots of comments here this morning as well, so I'm sure you'll bear lots of those in mind. So I'm sure you'll be very reflective. We know we haven't got endless amount of money, we know that, but at least it's a start. It's kicking something off. It's giving perhaps hopefully young people a chance of picking up some of these strands as well. So thank you both for your time this morning. Thank you. Our final item on the agenda this morning is the work programme, which we have sort of talked about this morning. We've identified some areas from the previous meeting. We do have one or two items on from the previous one. Please.
Good afternoon. So I'm Sophie Foster, Overview and Scrutiny Officer. So in terms of the work programme, it's absolutely owned by you as the committee and is intended to be flexible. So it's very likely that each time it comes back to the committee that you will have seen it change and its iterations as you've learned more from briefings and the evidence you've heard, such as the really in-depth discussions that have been able to happen today. The current programme, which I'll pop up in a second, is deliberately very focused, as with the declaration of the financial emergency. This has influenced all of the committee's approach in terms of ensuring topics of focus, can add value and are actionable, and can support rapid progress on key issues. So as I pop it up, I suppose that the questions that I'd pose to you as the officer supporting you are there any topics following today that haven't already been highlighted that you feel should be considered in the programme? Which areas you may then wish to think in terms of prioritising, because both in terms of member capacity and officer capacity, where do you feel you can add that most value? Whether there's any further information required that can be done through research, which I as an officer, as your committee support can provide, and then which items or item that you feel would initially be forming part of the further information from the quarterly performance report, those specific areas by exception which had already been discussed, and which topic you think or topics you might want to be focusing in your next public meeting, which is the 14th of January. But I appreciate that you've got, well, we're already at 1 o'clock, so it's probably not possible to have that discussion now. So I've got a possible suggestion in terms of a next step with that, but you as committee members may also have a different perspective. But my suggestion would be that it would be possible to hold an informal meeting of the committee quite shortly from today via Teams, just to be able to reflect on what you've heard today, because there's been a lot of information, and to be able to then work through the programme that way. So thank you, Chair.
I think that's quite acceptable. Would you all agree? That is a very sensible. We've a lot of information here. We need a lot of consolidation, and we'll arrange a Teams meeting for the next few weeks, and we can all think of items which we want to explore further. I'm sure there's ones which we write pages of them now, and we can discuss that then online then. Okay. Thank you all very much indeed for your time this morning and for your contribution. And the next meeting is 10 o'clock on Wednesday the 14th of January. Prior to that, we will have a meeting in the next few weeks now to look at the programme forward. Thank you all very much. Thank you.